Hey guys! Tonight we slip into something a little toasty, mildly chaotic, and extremely flour-dusted. You're waking up in ancient Rome, where the ovens are already roaring, the streets are still half asleep, and the smell, the smell of freshly baked barley loaves curls through the air like a breakfast siren. You're not wearing shoes yet, but you're already trailing that warm scent down a cobbled alley. It's barely past the 6th hour of night, so early the stars haven't even clocked out, and someone's already shouting about underbaked crusts and burned fig rolls. You probably won't survive this shift, not because of wild beasts or invading Visigoths, but because Roman bakers ran on zero sleep, molten heat, and a barely suppressed rage that their rival across the street was secretly adding date syrup to his dough. The stakes? A few more clients, a little extra coin, and maybe, just maybe, getting noticed by someone in a purple-bordered toga. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere cozy, let me know your city and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing outside a narrow shopfront tucked between a wine cellar and a sandal repair stall. It doesn't look like much, just a soot-caked awning and a few cracked clay pots stacked by the door. But inside, a flurry of movement, the scent of yeast rising, the heat practically melting your eyebrows. Welcome to a Roman pistrina. A bakery, sure, but also a furnace, a gossip mill, and the unofficial nerve center of every neighborhood. You duck under the archway and immediately trip on a flour-slick tile. Classic. One of the apprentices glares at you while turning a bowl of shaggy dough with a paddle the size of a coffin lid. Behind him, a bald man with a stained tunic is shoveling something into the belly of a domed oven. He's whistling, but it's not a happy tune. It's the kind of whistle that says, "I haven't slept in 2 days, and if one more customer asks for extra sesame, I will cry." Roman baking wasn't just a job, it was a calling, a physically exhausting, shoulder-breaking, ash-in-your-hair calling. These bakers worked through the night, so their neighbors could wake up to warm bread, and not just one type. No. The Romans had dozens of styles, each with its own crust quirks and flour politics. There were panis quadratus, the famous segmented loaves you've seen carbonized in Pompeii, fine white breads for the rich, brown barley loaves for the commoners, even loaves stuffed with cheese, honey, and herbs for the indulgent. And you? You're the new hire. You're already sweating. Someone shoves a reed basket into your arms. It's filled with flat, unbaked rounds of dough. You're supposed to load them into the oven using a long wooden peel. No one warns you that the oven's heat hits like the breath of a sun dragon. You instinctively lean back and the dough wobbles, threatening to slide off like some tragic pastry landslide. In the back corner, a teenage apprentice is arguing over whose batch was bouncier, a term you're quickly realizing is Roman slang for more likely to get a patrician's approval and a silver tip. This isn't a calm kitchen, it's a battlefield, and every bread matters. Historians still argue whether the segmented panis loaves were pre-cut for convenience or marked for portion control. Some believe the divisions were about religion, offering one slice to the household gods, one for the guest, one for the enslaved cook. Others think it was just a clever way to make sure no one got a crustless piece. The horror. Here's a tidbit you didn't expect. The first known bakeries with mechanical mills were powered by donkeys, literally. A blindfolded donkey would walk in endless circles to grind flour. This means somewhere, some baker had a donut-shaped stable with an extremely dizzy donkey and probably a lot of kicked-over buckets. You duck as someone throws a bundle of herbs into the coals. Laurel for aroma, apparently. Smells more like scorched soup, but you say nothing. Roman mornings were noisy, sticky, and full of smells. The bakery was a place of rhythm. The thud of kneading, the scrape of paddles, the occasional shout of, "Where's the fine flour?" Or, "Tell Marcus I want my usual or I'm going to the other place." You've barely been here half an hour, and already you've developed a love-hate relationship with barley. It loves to stick to your sleeves. You hate how it clumps in your sandals. One customer pokes her head through the curtain. She's wrapped in a stola and radiates the air of someone who tips in gossip, not coin. She glances at the loaves cooling on the shelf, sniffs dramatically and mutters, "Too chewy yesterday." Then she leaves. You consider flinging a hot crust after her, but you value your job too much. Barely. At this point, your arms are aching, your eyes are stinging from smoke, and you're starting to realize why the average Roman baker had the posture of a melted amphora. Still, there's something oddly hypnotic about it. The flour dust swirling in the dawn light, the rhythm of shaping dough, the smell of caraway, cumin, and olive oil warming in the corners. It's chaos, yes, but it's edible chaos. You find yourself settling into the rhythm. Maybe you're just tired. Maybe the heat is cooking your brain. But for a fleeting moment, as the first rays of morning sun break across the rooftops and you catch a whiff of sweet pine resin from a baker's experiment in the corner, you think, yeah, this isn't the worst way to start a day. Just don't drop the dough. You shuffle backward from the heat of the oven, clutching an empty peel that's already blackened at the edge. Your tunic is sticking to your back like a wet rag. Your palms are streaked with flour and ash. And your eyes, oh, your eyes, are now permanently squinted from the blinding glare of open flame. Welcome to the glamorous world of early morning Roman baking, where caffeine hasn't been invented yet, and the closest thing to breakfast is licking honey off your thumb when no one's looking. Outside, a line is forming. No one in it looks particularly patient. A small boy is stomping his foot because he wants Panis libum, not Panis rusticus. An elderly man with no eyebrows, you don't ask, keeps muttering about someone skipping him in line yesterday. And directly in front of the shop, two market women are having a silent, slow-motion standoff over who technically arrived first. You're beginning to think the real fire hazard isn't the oven, it's the customers. See, bread in Rome wasn't just food, it was currency. It was a daily event. It was a social contract wrapped in warm crust and broken promises. Everyone, from the poorest tenant farmer to the most decorated general, lined up for it. But what they lined up for varied wildly. Some demanded soft white loaves, so light they felt like eating a cumulus cloud. Others wanted barley bricks tough enough to withstand a sword blow. You watch as the bakery's front man, a wiry guy, with a quill stuck behind one ear and a perpetual look of faint doom, starts distributing orders. He knows everyone by name, habit, and grudge. He hands the old man 2 crusty loaves and a thin smile. To the boy's mother he offers a slightly burnt libum with a sheepish shrug. She accepts, muttering, "At least it's not sour this time." In some ways, this whole ritual is almost theatrical. The queue isn't just a line, it's a stage. People greet each other, argue over yesterday's loaves, trade rumours, even show off their new sandals. For many, the bakery was a public square wrapped in cinnamon and soot. Historians still debate whether bakeries like this were privately owned or managed as a kind of public utility. Some argue that because bread was often subsidized by the government, especially during the later imperial years, bakers were essentially civil servants in aprons. Others believe they operated more like modern franchises, each fiercely independent, prone to innovation and, let's be honest, occasional sabotage. And then there's the fringe theory that bakeries doubled as information hubs for local spies. Apparently, no one listens better than someone who handles dough at 3 a.m. You step outside for air. Bad idea. The sun has just peeked over the tiled rooftops, and already the alley feels like a bread-scented sauna. Your sandals squelch against cobblestones that have absorbed 1,000 years of foot traffic and the occasional spilled amphora. A dog noses a broken basket near the door, hopeful for crumbs. You give him a crust. He looks offended and trots off. Back inside, another batch is ready. The bread paddle wobbles ominously as you slide it under the half-baked rounds. One collapses slightly at the edge. You panic. The head baker glances over, raises an eyebrow and says, "Bless him. That'll be for the boy who hates crust. They don't just tolerate your mistakes here, they bake them into the day. Someone sets a pot of must, fermented grape juice, next to the cooling racks. They're glazing tomorrow's fig rolls. The smell is intoxicating. Not good intoxicating. More like, why does this smell like vinegar and wet wood? You back away. One of the apprentices starts whistling a tune you don't recognize. It has that annoying perkiness that only people under the age of 20 can summon before sunrise. You retaliate by clanging the peel just a little louder than necessary. Across the street, another bakery is opening its shutters. You see a different team of flour-streaked humans arranging their loaves in the window. Their bread looks suspiciously fluffier. Your baker notices too. He narrows his eyes and mutters, "They've been overwatering the flour again. Cheating. Welcome to the eternal war, bakery versus bakery. It's Kerry. It's not just competition, it's vendetta with breadcrumbs. If one baker figures out how to keep crusts crisper longer, it becomes a closely guarded secret. If another manages a lighter rise, whispers start flying. She's using imported spelt. He's hiding honey in the walls. Their donkey mill turns faster. And yes, sometimes things go sideways. Recipe theft was real. Bakers got accused of spying, stealing family sourdough starters, even swapping out spice jars just to sabotage each other's flavor. There are clay tablets listing formal complaints filed between bakeries, including one where someone was accused of knocking down a wall at night to disturb fermentation. That's a level of petty we should all aspire to. Here's a fun fact. Some of the earliest Roman bread was stamped, literally. Bakers used carved wooden stamps to press logos or maker's marks into the dough before baking. That way, if someone complained later, the baker could say, "Not mine. See? Wrong stamp?" We like to imagine it was the ancient version of Yelp. You haul the last batch onto the table and stare at the finished spread. It's kind of beautiful, loaves in tidy rows, each slightly different. Some scored in sharp X's, some with braided edges, a few experimental ones that look like vaguely disappointed turtles. It's art, it's breakfast, it's chaos crusted, and as the first sunbeam slices through the doorway, catching the steam curling off a fresh barley loaf, you realize something. You haven't blinked in half an hour, you're tired, you're sticky, you may never get flour out of your ears, but this is kind of magic, and the line outside just got longer. You barely have time to stretch your fingers before the next crisis ambles in, wearing a tunic 2 sizes too small and an attitude 2 shades too entitled. He's a grain merchant, or so he claims. You can tell by the way he waves his scroll around like a senator and talks about price fluctuations while eyeing your best loaves like a hawk with a gluten craving. He slaps the scroll down on the counter and says, "You've been shorting my flour again." The head baker doesn't flinch. He's kneading dough with all the indifference of a man who's been accused of worse. "Check the scales," he mutters, not even looking up. You, of course, are the scales, literally.
You're the one.
One holding the counterweights and trying not to tip anything too obviously. You gently balance the bronze measure with the merchant's last sack of flour. It's light, by maybe a handful, but the dust on your robes suggests it spilled earlier. Probably. Hopefully. Still, the accusation hangs in the air like a puff of burnt millet. This is Rome. And in Rome, bread isn't just food. It's politics. The government controls grain prices, subsidizes loaves, and issues flour rations to keep the peace. Free grain for citizens, known as the annona, is a lifeline for the poor, a bargaining chip for the Senate, and an absolute headache for bakers like you. Historians still argue whether this system helped stabilize the empire or hastened its dependency on handouts. One camp says it was visionary social welfare, another calls it ancient economic quicksand. Meanwhile, you're just trying not to get blamed for a scale that leans suspiciously to the left. You distract the merchant with a complimentary honey roll. It works. He grumbles, chews, and wanders off in search of someone else to accuse. Back inside, things aren't calmer. One of the apprentices is missing, again. The remaining 3 are blaming each other with the passive aggression of overcooked lentils. Apparently, someone forgot to add salt to an entire batch, and now the loaves taste like beige sadness. You are nominated to taste test. Yep, beige sadness. There's a quiet moment then where everyone just stands around, chewing in mild despair. Even the head baker stops. He stares at the oven like it personally betrayed him. Then he says the worst words you can hear before noon. "We'll have to redo it." You groan. Someone curses. Someone else openly weeps into a sack of rye. The oven mercifully does not explode. Here's a quirky tidbit. Roman ovens, called fornax, were built like upside-down bowls with a hole in the middle for smoke and heat to vent. The heat distribution was unpredictable. Sometimes one side of the loaf cooked twice as fast as the other. Hence why Roman bakers developed techniques like rotating loaves mid-bake or covering them in damp cloth to even out crusts. You try all of this and still manage to burn your sleeve. Also, the term fornax is where we get the modern word fornicate, because apparently some bakeries doubled as, let's call them, after-hours institutions. You try not to think about that as you scrub ash off a cooling rack. Back to the redo. This time, everyone's sharper. The flour is measured twice, the water is spring fresh, and the salt, oh, the salt is poured in like you're warding off evil spirits. You knead. You shape. You watch the loaves rise like little pale volcanoes of promise. And yet, the competition is watching. Across the alley, the rival bakery sends over a boy with a jug of shared water. It's definitely a trick. Your head baker waves him off like a mosquito. There's no formal war between Roman bakeries, but there might as well be. Rival shops would poach apprentices, spy on ingredient lists, and sometimes even bribe customers to sabotage feedback. You once overheard someone complain that your bread tasted like bricks, only to see him walk into the other bakery and collect a free apricot tart. Treachery. Thy name is pastry, and it gets worse. Some bakers began baking their loaves with hidden marks, symbols or initials pressed subtly into the underside of the crust, just in case their bread was swapped out or misrepresented. Think of it as edible watermarks. Yours looks like a squiggle. You pretend it's a dolphin. The new loaves come out golden. The crust sings when you tap it. Even the head baker cracks a smile. It's brief, terrifying, and oddly beautiful. You set them on the rack and breathe deep. It's that moment in the bakery cycle when everything smells right. A mix of yeast, smoke, and roasted sesame that could lull a tiger to sleep. You lean against the wall just for a second, just until the next crash. A flour sack has burst. There is white dust everywhere. You look like a ghost. Someone laughs. Someone else sneezes so hard they fall into the olive bin. You're too tired to care. You grab a crusty end off a cooling loaf, technically against the rules, but you've earned it. The inside is soft, warm, and a little salty. Perfect. You take a second bite, and a third. Someone catches you and just nods. Today, you're all thieves in the temple of carbs. One more fun fact before the hour turns. There's record of a baker in Pompeii whose house included a bakery, a private mill, and an attached living space, all under one roof. That's right. He literally slept above the ovens, not for efficiency, but because the bakery was his world. His name was Modestus. His loaves were found preserved in ash. You think of him now, this ancient man who probably also burned a batch or two, who also fought over salt levels, who also got covered in flour and muttered curses before dawn. You're part of a long, sticky, sweaty, delicious tradition. And as the sun begins to arc over the rooftops and more customers shuffle in for their daily round, you tuck the dolphin-stamped loaf into the basket and whisper, "That one's for Modestus." You blink against the sunlight slanting through the shop's front awning. It's getting later in the morning now, and the bakery's pace has shifted. Not slower, never slower, but steadier. Less shouting, more muttering. The ovens still roar, but now they hum like old friends. And your hands, which just hours ago were clumsy, have started to move with their own strange rhythm. Scoop, shape, dust, stack. You're not a baker yet, but you're no longer a hazard. Congratulations. Outside, the queue is melting into mid-morning bustle. Bread secured, citizens disperse toward their routines. Laundry at the river, debates in the forum, one guy definitely trying to train a goose. You glimpse a patrician woman sweeping by in white silk, balancing a loaf on a lacquered tray like it's the Ark of the Covenant, because in some parts of Rome it is. Bread, you're learning, is a ladder, a status signal, and every flour speck tells a story. Panis plebeius, the dark, rough bread of the common people. Thick, coarse, barely risen, filling, heavy. You've eaten 3 bites and still feel like you swallowed a roof tile. Panis candidus, the fine white loaf of the wealthy. Silky soft, sifted multiple times to remove every trace of bran or grit. The kind of bread that makes people say things like delicate crumb with a straight face. And in between, dozens of other varieties. Honey-sweetened panis libum, seed-studded panis siligineus. Even cakes made of spelt, eggs and cheese, though those are more often offered to gods than eaten at breakfast. Historians still argue whether this flour-based hierarchy reinforced class divisions or simply reflected them. Was the empire divided by wealth or by wheat? One thing's clear, if your loaf didn't look perfect, someone would notice. Especially if that someone was a senator's wife. Which is why every morning you watched your boss agonize over loaf shapes like a sculptor deciding which marble block would offend Jupiter least. Speaking of Jupiter, there's a new delivery this morning, a modest offering basket for the temple down the road. In it are small loaves shaped like ears, tiny hands, and what might be a goose or possibly a fish with opinions. These votive breads are meant for the gods, tithes, tokens, edible prayers. You help arrange them carefully, unsure whether the deformed loaf you just added will bless or curse the next festival. Quirky tidbit of the hour. Roman religion didn't just involve animal sacrifice. Bread offerings were common and symbolic. Panis strus, a special layered bread, was offered during particular rituals. Some breads were baked without salt for purity, others were stamped with sacred symbols. There's even evidence that unlucky loaves, ones that collapsed or cracked, were burned as a form of spiritual apology. You glance at your latest batch and whisper a soft sorry just in case. Just when things feel calm, a new problem walks through the door. Literally stomps in. It's the grain inspector. He's wearing the official sash, bright red, wrinkled from disuse, and carrying a set of ivory weights so pristine you suspect they've never been used outside of ceremony. His sandals squeak. His eyes scan the bakery like a hawk with an axe to grind. Random inspection, he says. As if you didn't already guess, there's a collective groan from the staff. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because grain inspectors always find something wrong. It's their job and their hobby. He checks your scales, sniffs your sacks, holds a flour sample to the light as if it contains state secrets. Then he reaches for one of the morning loaves, breaks it open, sniffs again, chews with the solemnity of a man judging not just texture, but your soul. You try not to breathe. He swallows, shrugs. A touch dry? That's it. That's the entire review. A touch dry. You've sweated through your tunic for a touch dry? He leaves without writing anything down, but not before, accidentally, dropping one of your better loaves on the floor and stepping on it. As he walks away, you hear him mutter, "Not as good as Quintus's." Ah, yes. The inspector's cousin owns the bakery across the alley. This is why you've learned not to put faith in official rankings. The real approval comes from the old woman who's been buying your rye since the last Saturnalia, or the delivery boy who swears your crusts stay crispy longer than anyone else's, or the child who points to your honey roll and says, "That one." You wear those victories in crumbs. Time for another oddball fact. The Roman Empire's grain imports were so massive that entire fleets were built just to ferry wheat from North Africa and Egypt to the capital. These shipments were timed with freakish precision. Any delay meant riots. Or odds or worse, bread panic, which in Rome was about one missed meal away from a revolution. So bakers weren't just artisans, they were pressure valves for the entire city. Keep the people fed and the empire holds. Let the ovens go cold. And well, you'd better hide your peel. Your head baker pours a ladle of oil onto a flat, unfinished dough round. He spreads it with the back of the ladle, adds a few olives, and slides it into the oven without a word. You know what this means. It's the unofficial staff lunch. It comes out blistered, bubbling, perfect. You each tear off a piece, no plates, no ceremony. Just warm bread, steam curling up, oil slicking your fingers. Someone adds a smear of garum, Roman fish sauce, because of course they do. You try not to gag, fail slightly, eat more anyway. And then, with a groan and a stretch and a sigh that seems to echo off the walls, you realize it's almost midday. The rush has passed, the ovens are cooling. The last customer just left, carrying a lopsided loaf and humming a song you've heard before but can't name. You wipe your hands, lean against the counter, and breathe. You've survived another Roman morning, and the dough for tomorrow? It's already rising. It's past midday now, and the bakery finally exhales. The oven fire has dimmed to a gentle pulse. The last of the delivery baskets are stacked neatly against the back wall, each one dusted with a delicate fringe of flour. For the first time all morning, no one is shouting, no one is dropping dough. Even the apprentices, previously fueled by chaotic energy and passive-aggressive sarcasm, have slumped against sacks of millet in a unified collapse. And you? You're seated on an overturned crate, arms dusted white, fingers sore, mouth stained faintly with the memory of salted olive loaf. You should feel exhausted. And you do. But there's a strange glow beneath the fatigue, a warm, glowing sense of you did it. Of course, that's when the messenger shows up. He's breathless, red-cheeked, and holding a scroll with the wax seal of the Praefectus Annonae, the official in charge of grain supply. Never a good sign. You squint at the seal, then at the boy, then at your boss. He sighs before even opening it. Turns out tomorrow's grain shipment has been delayed. Again. Which means your already dwindling reserves of emmer wheat and barley have to stretch one more day, which means you'll be baking for half the city on a third of the supply, which means you're going to have to get creative. Historians still argue whether these grain delays were due to weather, corruption, or the natural chaos of shipping 60,000 tons of wheat across the Mediterranean without GPS. One camp insists it was systemic inefficiency. Another points to shipwrecks, piracy, and the occasional "oops, we dropped a grain silo in the harbour" moment. Either way, it was the bakers who suffered. You glance at the remaining sacks, just a few left, tucked in the corner like nervous goats. Your boss is already doing the math out loud. If we dilute with lentil flour and cut the loaves smaller, it begins. Roman bakers were masters of substitution. When grain was short, they stretched dough with ground pulses, legumes, even stale crumbs from yesterday's loaves. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes the result was a brick with a personality disorder, but either way, it had to be done. Quirky fact of the hour, ancient Roman cookbooks do include recipes for bread made entirely from chickpeas. Not chickpea flour, just mashed chickpeas. The result? Sort of like a gluten-free cannonball, not great for slicing, but apparently very good for throwing at rats. You rise to help measure out the substitutes, but your legs do that thing where they forget how to be legs. You wobble. Catch yourself on a broom. No one notices. Or if they do, they're too tired to mock you. The apprentices are scooping lentils into a large mortar. One of them tries to hum a tune, but it peters out halfway through. The mortar thuds, the pestle groans. The air fills with the smell of something faintly nutty and oddly hopeful. The test batch is small, just enough dough for 4 loaves, each no larger than a curled fist. You shape them carefully, trying to remember every tip you've overheard. Don't over-knead lentil blends. Add oil to keep it from cracking. Pray to Ceres if all else fails. Into the oven they go. Time slows. You crouch by the fire, watching the loaves rise, or at least try to rise. One bulges oddly, like it's growing a nose, another splits down the side in what can only be described as dramatic fashion. The third just sits there, stubbornly lumpish, like a loaf-shaped boulder refusing to join the fun. And yet, they smell good, earthy, savoury, like someone ground up a very polite bean and gave it a hug. Eventually, the loaves emerge. Not perfect, not pretty, but baked. You crack one open. The crumb is dense but soft, the flavour surprisingly decent. One apprentice declares it almost bread, which is high praise around here. You laugh out loud. It startles the dog, and just like that, the mood shifts. The emergency is still real, but now it's manageable. You've got a plan, you've got lentils, you've got enough creative desperation to feed 3 city blocks. Someone brings out a jug of Posca, sour wine diluted with water. It's technically a soldier's drink, but today it's your reward. You sip. It's terrible, but also refreshing in a way only something faintly vinegary and questionably fermented can be. You lean back against the flour sacks and close your eyes for just a second. In the quiet, you hear the faint clatter of hooves in the street, the distant clang of metal on metal. Somewhere, someone is shouting about figs, but here, in the warm, flower-scented calm of the bakery, all that matters is that the bread is ready. For now. You think back to that ancient baker from Pompeii, Modestus again. His loaves survived a volcano. Yours survived lentils and bureaucracy. Not quite the same, but it still counts. Your boss walks by, glances at the test loaf, then at you. "It'll do," he says. High praise, almost a compliment. You decide to take it as such. You stare at the dough rising for tomorrow's batch, already tinged with lentil flour and cautious hope. And as the sun reaches its highest point, casting golden light across the soot-streaked tiles and the gently humming oven, you realize this is what Rome runs on, not politics, not legions, not marble speeches, but loaves, cracked, crusty, and a little weird around the edges, just like you. The heat outside is thick enough to slice. You can hear it, somehow, the sticky drone of sun-baked cobblestones, the low hum of sleepy bees, the distant yawn of a market stall being reluctantly closed for the midday rest. Inside the bakery, however, you're discovering that bakers do not rest. Not really. They mop, they scrub, they reorganize sacks of flour with the haunted efficiency of people who have done this every day since the founding of Rome. You're handed a rag and assigned to clean the trough, capital T. It's less a piece of equipment and more a sacred relic, long, wooden, carved deep with grooves from 1,000 mornings of kneading. You suspect it's older than some temples, possibly haunted, definitely sticky. You get to work. This is the part of the day most people don't see. The invisible labor, the hours between baking and delivery, when the bakery transforms from chaotic forge to quiet shipyard. Tools are wiped, ashes scraped, baskets repaired. The oven is fed with kindling so it cools evenly, like lulling a dragon to sleep after it's been fed a buffet of barley bricks. The apprentices are arguing again, this time about who left the spelt uncovered. You're only half listening until one of them mentions a name, Gaius the Crisp. You perk up. Ah, yes, Gaius the Crisp. Legend, myth, probably real. Supposedly invented a crust so thin and so perfectly blistered that senators offered him villas in exchange for the recipe. He refused, of course. Vanished into the countryside. Some say he opened a tavern. Others claim he became a priest of Vesta and never baked again. Historians still argue whether he existed at all. There are no inscriptions, no statues, just whispered stories passed down by bakers who swear they once saw his crust and wept. The debate among your co-workers escalates until someone pulls out a burnt loaf and slams it down dramatically, yelling, "Would Gaius the Crisp serve this?" A moment of silence follows, then laughter. Then someone eats the loaf anyway. You clean the trough until the wood gleams. It smells faintly of oil, sourdough, and regret. Perfect. Now comes the prep for tomorrow. You're in charge of mixing the bigger, a wet, pre-fermented dough that acts like a starter. You pour lukewarm water into a basin, add the flour, and mix with your hands. It's warm, spongy, slightly alive. The scent is yeasty and sharp, like a polite warning. You love it. There's a rhythm to this, a simplicity. Flour, water, time. And yet within that formula, infinite possibility. Some dough rises tall and proud. Others collapse like badly planned bridges. You never quite know which you'll get. That's half the terror. And all the fun. Quirky detail for your collection. Roman bakers didn't use thermometers or timers. They relied on smell, feel, sound. A properly proofed dough, they said, should sigh when poked. Not squeak, not groan. Sigh. Like a senator at a second-rate feast. You let the dough rest under a cloth and turn to the spice shelf. Ah, the spice shelf. It's a mess. There's cumin, coriander, fennel, aniseed, tiny jars of imported cinnamon and clove, rare, expensive, guarded like treasure. Some are kept in double-wrapped leather satchels. Others are disguised in olive jars to keep them from being pinched by curious apprentices. You swear one jar growled at you. Each spice has its story. See a tea story. Cumin from the east, fennel from the hills, silphium, now extinct, once prized more than gold. It flavored sauces, cured ailments, and possibly worked as a love potion, depending on who you asked and how many amphorae of wine they'd consumed. Today, you're tasked with preparing conditum panis, flavored bread, often served at banquets. You blend honey, pepper, a touch of mint, and just a whisper of crushed dates. The dough is sticky, fragrant, too delicate for the fire. It must be baked in a separate clay pot, slow, low, patient. As the loaf rises, the air changes, no longer just the scent of ash and grain, but something sweeter, deeper, the kind of smell that makes you close your eyes, that makes you forget the sweat behind your knees or the flour under your nails, that reminds you this is what bread is for. Not survival, not politics, not taxes, but pleasure. You slice the finished loaf with care. The crust is amber, the inside dotted with dates like sunlit fossils. You offer a piece to the head baker. He nods, chews, says, "You're learning." That's it. No fanfare, no applause. But it lands heavier than gold. There's a moment of stillness then, the kind of stillness that feels like a reward. Outside, a vendor shouts about melons. A child shrieks with laughter. Inside, the bakery exhales one last time. You lean against the counter, watching the dust motes dance in the slanted sunbeams. You made bread today, you fed Rome, and tomorrow you'll do it again. The bakery is quieter now, eerily so. Even the ever-clattering amphora by the back door seems to be taking a nap. The fire has been coaxed into glowing coals. The doughs are resting, swelling under cloth like slow-breathing creatures. The apprentices have collapsed into various corners like abandoned laundry. You, however, are still standing, because the delivery list has arrived. It's handwritten on stiff papyrus, probably by someone who's never touched flour in their life. The ink is smudged, the names are confusing, and some of the instructions questionable. 4 sesame loaves to the Domus Aurelia, 2 without crust, 1 possibly cursed. Right. You grab the baskets and start arranging the orders. Each one is tied with twine and marked with a clay token, an identificator that tells the recipient which bakery sent it. Think ancient branding. Your shop's mark is a simple spiral, elegant, hard to fake, easy to drop. As you work, a messenger slinks in and slaps down an unmarked pouch of coins. "From the Thermopolium on Via Carmina," he says, scratching his beard. "They want more loaves for tomorrow, the soft kind." You raise an eyebrow. That particular Thermopolium, a sort of Roman snack bar, is known for being frugal. If they're requesting more, something's up. Still, more orders mean more prestige. Historians still argue whether bakeries actively competed for Thermopolium contracts, or if they were handed out via guild favoritism and backroom deals. Some believe it was a meritocracy of crust. Others insist that knowing someone's cousin's uncle was more effective than perfect flour ratios. Either way, you add 6 soft loaves to tomorrow's prep list and resist the urge to steal a single olive roll for the road, because now it's delivery time. You lift the first basket, still warm, pleasantly heavy, and head out the door. Rome greets you with the low din of afternoon chaos. Sandals slapping stone, vendors shouting over one another, the occasional runaway chicken cutting across traffic like it's late for a Senate meeting. Your first stop is a bathhouse. They've ordered herb loaves for the massage attendants. Apparently, Nothing pairs with hot stone therapy like rosemary bread. You navigate the steam-filled hall carefully, avoiding puddles and the judgmental stares of half-naked patrons. One nods at your basket. Finally, something worth sweating for. You smile, leave the package, and flee. Next up, a modest villa owned by a playwright. He opens the door shirtless, covered in ink stains, and clearly hasn't slept. "Do you have the ones with the sesame crust and existential dread?" he asks. You hand him the requested loaves and offer a bonus honey bun. "Ah," he sighs, "for the muse." And then, the Domus Aurelia. This place is massive. You can hear fountains inside, plural. A servant greets you at the gate, examines the basket, and frowns at the loaf with a slightly cracked edge. "I requested it without imperfections," she says, as though speaking to a particularly dumb goat. You resist the urge to remind her it's bread, not marble. Instead, you hand her a replacement and offer your most apologetic baker's bow, 90% respect, 10% sarcasm. She sniffs and vanishes inside. Ah, Rome. Here's a fun detail. Wealthier Roman households often had private ovens, but they still bought bread from local pistrinae. Why? Because baking was hot, messy, and beneath their status. Some things never change. As you walk back, basket empty, and stomach starting to growl, you pass a child clutching a crust-like treasure. He bites into it and grins so wide you nearly forget how badly your feet hurt. Nearly. You pause near a shaded fountain to rest. The stone is cool, the water trickles, a pigeon lands beside you and eyes a breadcrumb on your sleeve with intense suspicion. You flick it toward him, he nods, pecks, and flies off. Back at the bakery, cleanup has begun. The ashes are being swept, the mixing bowls are stacked, a broken peel is being repaired with twine, and what you suspect is hope. The apprentices have revived slightly. One is humming, another is sleepwalking while upright. It's fine. You step inside and breathe deep. Still warm, still yeasty, still faintly spicy from the morning's experiment. You feel it now, not just the fatigue, but the weight of what this place means. This bakery isn't just a workplace, it's an engine. It feeds families, sustains rituals, sweetens holidays, and solves arguments before they start. It's where news is traded, friendships forged, stomachs filled. You're not just making food, you're maintaining civilization. One lumpy loaf at a time. Evening in Rome doesn't mean peace, it means different noise. The chaotic shuffle of morning has given way to the thick, humming churn of twilight. Workers heading home, market stalls banging shut, dogs barking at shadows. Somewhere down the alley a drunk is serenading an amphora. But here in the bakery, it's a slow unraveling. You're finally off your feet, sort of. Perched on an empty grain crate, back against the flour wall, legs outstretched like you've just returned from war. One of the apprentices offers you a crusty end from the last barley batch. You accept like it's treasure, because it is. Your jaw clicks on the first bite. Solid, dense, slightly overdone, perfect. Someone lights an oil lamp. Its glow pools in the corner of the bakery, casting shadows that make the oven look less like a tool and more like a dozing animal. The last of the fire crackles inside, still giving off a quiet heat. Outside, the light fades from amber to indigo. This is the sacred time, not for prayer or politics, but for loaf talk. As your co-workers settle into their usual piles of sacks and folded cloaks, the real conversations begin, not about work, not about grain, but about ghosts in the flour, about who once baked a loaf so light it floated, about a woman who allegedly convinced a senator to fund her bakery by shaping dough into the likeness of his favorite horse. Quirky tale of the night, there was a brief, wild trend, probably during the later empire, of baking novelty loaves in strange shapes, animals, mythological beasts. One tablet even mentions panis testudinem, bread shaped like a turtle. Was it delicious? Unclear, but it was definitely adorable. Someone mentions Marcus Crumbicus, not his real name, obviously, but a nickname for a baker who once dropped an entire tray of loaves into a public fountain. They say the fish ate well that day. They also say Marcus changed his name and fled to Gaul. You laugh so hard you nearly choke on your crust. The head baker joins in. Not with a joke, he's not that sentimental, but with a story about the time the grain mill broke mid-batch. They had to grind wheat by hand using 2 stones and a very determined goat. The goat, he claims, was the best worker they ever had. Historians still argue whether animal labour in bakeries was widespread or occasional. In larger urban centres like Rome, donkey or horse-powered mills were common. But in smaller towns or during breakdowns, hand grinding wasn't just romanticised hardship, it was survival. And goats apparently were better at following instructions than certain apprentices. You're not naming names, but the one asleep in the grain bin definitely needs remedial kneading lessons. You stretch, letting the warmth of the last fire roll over your toes. The oil lamp flickers. The bakery smells like home now, faint ash, sourdough tang, a whisper of cumin, and sweat. Always sweat. Someone asks a question you hadn't expected. If you could only eat one kind of bread for the rest of your life, which would it be? It sparks a quiet flurry. Panis quadratus, says one. Too crusty, says another. Libum with honey, sighs the youngest apprentice. Rye, mumbles the head baker, because it doesn't lie to you. You think for a moment. Then answer, whichever one is still warm. They nod, the correct answer. Here's your historical nugget. The Roman poet Juvenal once mocked rich people who only ate the softest white bread, leaving coarse loaves for their servants. But it was the coarse bread that lasted longer, fed armies, and didn't collapse if you so much as looked at it wrong. Practical, honest, tough, you respect that. The conversation trails off. The apprentices settle into uneven snores. The head baker begins scribbling something in his ledger. Numbers, ingredients, maybe a R, maybe a recipe that'll confuse everyone tomorrow morning. The oil lamp gutters once, then steadies. You take one last walk around the bakery, just to check. The oven cooled. The flour sacks tied. The deliveries for tomorrow, stacked, labelled, ready. The bread is never done, but it's sleeping. You catch your reflection in a brass basin. You're streaked with soot, lined with flour, hair sticking to your face. But your eyes, they look alive because you're not just learning to bake. You're becoming part of something ancient, something essential. A tradition baked into the stones of the city itself. And as the moon rises above the tiled rooftops of Rome, casting its pale glow on alleyways and archways and half-eaten loaves left on windowsills, you curl onto your sack of barley and smile. Tomorrow will come. And with it, another loaf. Morning again. But not just any morning, festival morning. You wake to the sound of drums, distant, hollow, insistent. Someone's banging them with the enthusiasm of a man who's never heard the phrase, respect the neighbours. The bakery isn't even open yet, and already the street outside is pulsing with energy. Today is the feast of Fornicalia, the Roman holiday dedicated to ovens, grain, and, by extension, you. A whole celebration for the bread makers, the fire keepers, the flour sifters. And while most citizens treat it as an excuse to eat too much and wear impractical robes, for bakers, it's more like the Olympics. Your boss is already up. He's polishing the bakery's ceremonial peel, yes, that's a thing, with olive oil and muttering about last year's parade, when someone set a pastry cart on fire, not on purpose, probably. The apprentices are giddy. One's wearing a wreath of bay leaves. Another has tied scraps of cloth into little tassels around the oven, declaring it blessed. Someone tries to paint a happy face onto a loaf with honey glaze. It looks haunted. You move it discreetly behind a crate. Tradition dictates you bake a panis feroce, a sacred spelt bread offered to the goddess Fornax. It's an old recipe, simple. Flour, water, a pinch of salt and reverence. No oil, no sweeteners, no showing off, just grain and fire and patience. You knead the dough slowly, carefully. It's quieter work than usual. The others are prepping treats for the crowd, date cakes, honeyed rolls, even an experimental cheese-filled loaf that no one has agreed to taste yet. but the sacred bread is yours to shape. Historians still argue over the origins of the Fornicalia. Some say it dates back to the very beginnings of Roman civic religion. Others think it was invented by bakers' guilds to gain prestige. There's no definitive answer, just stories, scrolls, and the lingering scent of burnt barley in every archive. The dough rests. You sit beside it, watching the light spill in through the doorway. Out on the street, performers in garish masks are juggling amphorae. A man dressed as a giant loaf is waving at children. One child throws a fig at him. It misses. Barely. You bake the panis phareus in silence. No jokes, no sarcasm, just heat and trust. The crust forms slowly, turning golden around the edges, then tawny, then a soft brown that smells like patience. When it comes out, everyone gathers around. It's not fancy, not even particularly pretty, but it's right. You set it on a clean cloth. The head baker nods. The apprentices bow dramatically. One tries to kiss it. You slap his hand. It's time for the procession. You carry the loaf through the bakery's threshold with all the dignity of a priest presenting a relic. The street is packed. Musicians, vendors, children, the occasional goat in ceremonial ribbons. You spot a rival baker balancing a tray of sesame rolls like a tightrope walker. She winks at you. You nod back. Truce for today. At the center of the square stands a raised platform, decorated with laurel branches and golden bowls. There, the city's Bakers' Guild master gives a thundering speech, something about tradition, heat, honor, and the sacred duty of carbs. No one listens. Everyone's watching the bread. Your loaf is placed on the altar beside half a dozen others. There's a moment of collective silence. Then, cheers. It's over in seconds. A priest offers a brief blessing. Dancers whirl, drums resume, loaves are distributed to the crowd like confetti. You eat fried cheese bread until you regret it. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some households celebrated Fornicalia late and were labelled poplifugium, those who fled the people. They had to hold private ceremonies, often with only stale crusts and shame. You suspect one of your apprentices qualifies. Back at the bakery, the mood is light. Someone's playing a lyre. Another is asleep in the flour again. The oven glows, but gently now, like it's full from the feast. You're tired. But not in the usual way. Today's tired feels like the end of a marathon. Your muscles ache. Your hands are stiff. But inside there's this warm sense of belonging, of having done something old and good. You help clear the baskets, wipe the counters, brush the last of the celebratory sesame seeds off the floor. And as night descends again, quiet this time, the drums finally silenced, you find yourself sitting beside the oven, nursing a cup of warm must, watching the last embers fade. There are no orders to fill, no scales to balance, just the glow of coals and the satisfaction of bread well made. The next day begins with a thud, literally. Someone, probably the newest apprentice, has dropped an entire crate of dried figs onto the floor. It bursts like a fruit grenade, figs everywhere, rolling under tables into cracks behind the oven. One lands perfectly in your sandal. You sigh, pluck it out and eat it. Breakfast. It's not even dawn yet, but the bakery is already half alive. The coals are being stirred, the flour's being sifted. Someone's humming the same three-note tune they always hum when they're overtired and pretending not to be. You rub the sleep from your eyes and roll up your sleeves, because today is market baking day. Market baking is the wild cousin of normal baking. It's loud, rushed, unpredictable. You're not baking for clients with standing orders or for careful delivery lists. You're baking for foot traffic, for impulse buys, for the hungry and undecided, which means flavor, spectacle, and speed. The head baker slaps down a list on the counter. Honey fig rounds, olive and herb knots, sesame twists, whatever you can make look shiny in under an hour, and thus the performance begins. You start by prepping the honey fig dough. It's sticky, glorious, smells like a bakery's love letter to autumn. You chop the remaining floor figs, yes, even those. You trust the 3-second rule if the gods do. Mix them into the dough with warm honey and shape them into soft little domes. Next, the olive and herb knots. You roll out dough into long ropes, twist them into elaborate pretzel shapes, sprinkle them with crushed rosemary and black olives, and pretend you're not inventing this as you go. One comes out shaped like a sea creature. You name it, Panisaurus. Historians still argue whether the decorative breads sold at Roman markets were truly common, or if they were reserved for festivals and special events. Some frescoes show humble street stalls stacked high with shaped loaves and fancy rolls. Others suggest these were only for the wealthy, paraded through stalls more for status than stomachs. You've seen both. And you know, a hungry man will buy any bread that smells good, whether or not it looks like Neptune's beard. A tray clatters. The sesame twists have burned. Well, 3 of them have. The rest are fine. You hide the crispy ones at the bottom and move on. Time is dough. One of the apprentices races by holding a tray above his head like it's a sacred offering. "Out of cumin," he shouts. "Use aniseed," someone replies. "That's not the same." No one at the market knows that. Quirky fact of the hour. Roman spice substitution was both art and chaos. If something ran out, you improvised. Sometimes with genius, sometimes with crushed laurel leaves and consequences. One popular street bread recipe involved mixing dried rose petals into dough. It sounded romantic until you realized it also attracted every bee in a 3-block radius. You finish glazing the last batch just as the market carts arrive. The bakery has a small push cart, wooden, slightly squeaky, decorated with faded paint that once depicted wheat sheaves but now just looks like enthusiastic smudges. You and another apprentice loaded up with baskets, cloths, and the still warm loaves. Out into the street you go. The city's already stirring. Children chasing each other between columns, merchants arguing over space, a man balancing 3 geese on a plank for reasons no one wants to ask about. You find your usual corner near the fountain, set up the cart, and breathe deep. And then you start shouting. Fresh honey loaves, still warm, taste like victory. Twists with real olives, not the imaginary kind. Buy 3, and I'll throw in a polite nod. Slowly, the crowd gathers. At first, it's the usual market-goers, hungry workers, gossiping housewives, bored slaves sent on errands. But soon, you get the curious ones, the ones who weren't planning to buy bread but can't resist the smell. You see the moment it happens, the pause, the nose twitch, the slow turn toward your cart like a sunflower to the sun. One man bites into a honey fig round and immediately tries to haggle for 5 more. A child grabs a twist, eats it in 2 bites, then holds out his hand like a tiny emperor demanding tribute. A pair of older women sample your olive knots, look at each other, and just nod, the universal sign of baked approval. You sell out in under an hour, all but 1 roll. Slightly lopsided, slightly burnt. You keep it. Back at the bakery, you'd see, "E-bakery," you're greeted like a hero. The apprentices applaud. The head baker grunts something that might be "good job" if you squint. You put the last roll on the counter, break it in half, and share it with the apprentice who helped haul the cart. "You think this is how emperors feel?" he asks. "No," you say. They don't get to lick honey off their fingers. And right there, surrounded by flour and fire and the quiet joy of a market well served, you realize something. You're not just baking, you're performing, and the applause is edible. Late afternoon, the bakery's heartbeat has slowed, but it hasn't stopped. You're scraping burnt fig bits off the oven floor with a flat spatula that used to be a sword. No, really. Someone sharpened it down and hammered it flat after the last baker's apprentice accidentally set fire to a delivery order. That apprentice no longer works here. The sword spatula remains. You're alone in the heat for a moment, just the scrape of metal against stone and the quiet crackle of dying embers. It's oddly meditative. Your brain, softened by dough and repetition, wanders. You think about how long this has been going on. Not your shift, though it's felt roughly the length of the Punic Wars, but this work. Bread making, feeding people, keeping fire alive, shaping lumps of grain and water into something better. Something that makes people stop in the street. Something that says, "You're going to be okay, Have a bite. You wipe sweat off your brow with a floury forearm and stand up straight, because now it's time for a different kind of shift, recipe testing. Every few days, your bakery tries out something new, or old, or weird, sometimes by request, sometimes out of boredom, sometimes because someone found a scribbled note in the margin of a cookbook and took it personally. Today's experiment, a bread supposedly favored by gladiators. It's based on ancient notes, grain-heavy, bean-filled, baked hard to last through combat training, supposedly nutritious, definitely dense, the kind of loaf you could throw at a wild boar and at least stun it. You mix spelt flour, ground lentils, crushed fennel, and a splash of vinegar. No sweeteners, no softness, just the flavor of purpose. The dough feels like wet stone. You shape it into thick discs and slap them onto the hot stone directly, no tray, just heat and contact. They hiss like angry turtles. One apprentice watches nervously. You name the loaf Panis Maximus. He looks unconvinced. While it bakes, you review an older recipe scribbled on a wax tablet, probably from a retired baker. It involves pine nuts, fish paste, and sheep's milk. You decide not to try it. Here's your historical debate of the hour. Did gladiators really eat a special bread? Some scholars say yes, it provided energy and bulk for muscle growth. Others claim it was more myth than menu, and they ate the same fare as any soldier. What's certain is that their diet included massive amounts of barley. And if you've ever had plain boiled barley for lunch, you understand why a crusty bread was a welcome change. The test loaf comes out looking like a discus. You break it open, it's dry, yes, but the smell, roasty, earthy, complex. You tear a piece off and chew, and chew, and chew. It's not bad, exactly. It's just determined. The apprentice tries a bite. It's like eating a philosophy scroll, he says. You laugh. He's not wrong. Still, it's sturdy. It fills you up. It sticks in your teeth and makes you feel like you should go lift a cart or storm a fort. You pack the rest in cloth and set it aside for the local ludus, the gladiator school down the street. Maybe they'll appreciate it more. Later, as the sun dips behind the rooftops, you find yourself reorganizing the spice shelf again. Not because it needs it, because your hands need something to do. You find a small jar tucked in the back. Faded label. Smells like nutmeg and mystery. You show it to the head baker. He squints, opens it, sniffs and says, "That's from Tarsus, probably older than you." You pause. "Want to try it in a new dough tomorrow?" you ask. He grunts, which in baker language means yes, but if it ruins the batch, it's your fault. And that's the thrill, isn't it? This is a job. Yes, a rhythm, a heat, a practice. But it's also a constant experiment, an alchemy, an edible form of memory. A baker in Tarsus ground this spice 2 lifetimes ago. Now it's in your hands. What will you make of it? You tuck the jar in your apron pocket like a secret. The oven's glow is fading, the coals down to whispers. The apprentices are washing tools with the diligence of people hoping for early dismissal. You sit at the corner table, stretch your legs and nibble on the end of a fig twist from earlier. Still soft, still warm. And as the light fades into twilight, you feel that quiet satisfaction rise again. You're part of something. A line of hands and hearts and flowered brows stretching all the way back to the first person who mixed grain and water and thought, this might be something. And it is, every time. Evening brings the kind of stillness that only follows a day packed with motion, the kind where silence feels earned, like the bakery itself is finally catching its breath. You sit with your back against the flour shelf, knees drawn up, watching the shadows grow longer on the stone floor. The last of the golden light slips between the shutters like honey, painting streaks across the flour-dusted tiles. It's the hour when bread is no longer being made, but still somehow present. The heat from the oven lingers, seeping into your bones. The smell of scorched grain, old wood, and faint honey floats lazily in the air. A few loaves cool silently in the corner, their crusts crackling faintly as they settle. You can hear it if you lean close enough, the whisper of a loaf exhaling, a little thank you for surviving the fire. You're not done, not really. Because now comes the quiet inventory. The apprentices have scattered. One's off to deliver a leftover spelt round to his grandmother. Another is haggling over apples in the market before the stall closes. The head baker is upstairs, probably pretending to read while actually napping. That leaves you to count the flour sacks, check the oil jars, and make sure tomorrow's delivery tokens are all properly strung. You don't mind. This part has its own rhythm. 1, 2, 3 sacks of barley, half a jar of sesame, enough olive oil to fry 3 goats if necessary. You mentally note what's missing and what's not. There's a strange piece in this. In running your hand over sackcloth, in counting dried rosemary sprigs, in knowing exactly where the cracked clay bowl lives and how to angle it so it doesn't spill. In realizing that, without even meaning to, you now know this place better than your own thoughts. You pause near the back shelf. That little jar of mystery spice from earlier is still in your pocket. You pull it out again. It's heavier than it looks. You unscrew the lid and take a cautious sniff. Warm, spicy, a little citrusy, maybe cinnamon, maybe not, maybe something older. You sprinkle a few grains onto your fingertip and taste it. Whatever it is, it's interesting. You make a mental note to test it in tomorrow's morning loaves. Just pinch, maybe in the crust wash. Something subtle. Something new. That's the thing no one tells you when you start working in a bakery. The recipes aren't laws. They're memories. And you're allowed to edit memories. Especially if they still taste good. Quirky note for tonight. There are ancient Roman recipes for loaves that included crushed rose petals, poppy seeds, even ground oyster shells. Some were medicinal, others were simply for show. One scroll lists a panis viridis, a green bread supposedly dyed with fresh herbs and ash. Whether anyone actually ate it, historians still argue. Some say it was for offerings, others suspect it was just a kitchen accident that turned into a fashion. You run your hand across the bench. The wood is scarred, softened by decades of use. There are burn marks near the corner where someone once dropped a lamp. A single date pit rests in the groove between 2 planks. You don't move it. It belongs there. Outside, the air has cooled. You step through the bakery's back door into the alley. The sky is deep blue now, dappled with the first stars. The sounds of the city are softer, the splash of someone cleaning dishes, a dog barking in the distance, the faint music of a flute drifting from somewhere above. And there, just beyond the far rooftop, you spot smoke curling upward from another bakery. You smile. There's comfort in knowing you're not alone in this, that somewhere someone else is shaping dough, feeding an oven, scraping burnt crusts, wondering if the spice they found in the back of the shelf is nutmeg or a terrible mistake. The city runs on bread, not just physically, emotionally, politically, spiritually. Bread starts arguments and ends them. Bread keeps crowds calm. Bread is handed to the poor as justice, and to the wealthy as proof of their refinement. Bread is somehow everything. And you, weirdly enough, are part of it. You head back inside, place the spice jar on the shelf, where it can confuse someone else tomorrow, and stretch. Just before you blow out the lamp, you take one last look at the bench, the oven, the unfinished batch resting under cloth. You nod, just a little. Tomorrow's already waiting. Morning greets you with the gentle slap of a broom against your foot. Up, mumbles the head baker, not looking at you. The dough's already stretching. You blink awake on your usual flour sack, now half deflated and entirely imprinted with the shape of your elbow. Your back is stiff. Your hair has become a bristled sculpture. You've slept worse. Probably, somewhere. The oven is already warm. The air smells like rising dough and impending ding decisions. You stand, stretch, and shuffle to the mixing table, where 3 bowls wait, each covered with a cloth, each slightly domed in the center. One smells faintly of honey. Another, sharper, hints at the mysterious Tarsus spice you smuggled into the recipe yesterday. The third, barley, plain and honest. The working loaf. You uncover the cloths one by one, as if unveiling statues. The honey dough has overproofed slightly, poofing up like it's trying to escape. The barley is sturdy. The Tarsus mix is odd. The top looks like normal dough, but the smell is strange. Warm, earthy, slightly medicinal, and not entirely unpleasant. You make a face, then shrug. Time to bake. The others trickle in, yawning and complaining. One apprentice is missing a sandal. Another appears to be wearing someone else's toga. You don't ask. You simply assign them each to a task and go back to shaping loaves. Historians still argue whether Roman bakeries followed precise recipes or if everything was a chaotic free-for-all based on memory and family feuds. Some records show detailed instructions, ratios of flour to water, exact rest times, particular scoring patterns. Others suggest that most bakers learned entirely by watching someone older and grumpier. Your experience leans toward the latter. The first batch slides into the oven. You watch closely, especially the Tarsus loaf. Will it balloon, collapse, spontaneously combust? It rises, slowly, but it rises. The crust browns with a soft hiss. The kitchen quiets, everyone watching. The head baker walks past, sniffs, grunts, and keeps walking. You take that as approval. Later, when it comes out, you slice it. The crumb is tighter than usual, dense but not heavy. The flavor, warm, complex, almost spicy, but in a sleepy way. Like cinnamon had a nap and woke up polite. You hand out slices. Responses range from, "What is this?" to, "Is this legal?" to, "Do we have more?" You smile, you don't, but next time, you will. The rest of the day blurs into repetition, shaping, baking, cleaning, delivering. A senator's assistant stops by, demanding 5 loaves with exactly 7 sesame seeds on top. You count them carefully while fantasizing about throwing one into the Tiber. Someone accidentally salts the delivery batch twice. You salvage it by branding them as naval loaves. For the seafaring appetite, they sell out before lunch. Quirky tidbit of the day, some ancient Roman bakers were buried with their peel. Not metaphorically, literally. Tombs have been found with carved reliefs, showing the baker holding their long-handled paddle like a sword. In life, they fed the masses. In death, they kept the oven warm. You wonder what they'd make of your Tarsus loaf. By mid-afternoon, the bakery has returned to its usual hum. Tools are being scrubbed. The flour shelf is being restocked. You're restitching the handle on one of the delivery baskets when you hear a voice at the door, a woman in a clean, if faded, stola, holding a loaf, your loaf. "The one from this morning," she says, "the warm one with something in it." You tense. "I want another," she says. You blink, that's it. No complaints, no weird looks, just, "I want another." You nod wordlessly and wrap up one of the cooling loaves from the second batch. She presses a coin into your palm, more than it's worth, and leaves. No name, no small talk, just approval. You hold the coin for a moment. Smooth, heavy, worn by 100 other palms, it means little. But the gesture, that lands hard. Because in a city where everything is loud and layered and frantic, where bread can be weapon, gift, or bribe, someone just wanted more of what you made. And that's something. That's everything. You place the coin in a jar behind the shelf. Not with the others. This one's staying. The rest of the day passes in crumbs and conversation. You help someone fix a cracked bowl with melted wax. You find a long-forgotten roll under the bench, now fossilized. You taste it, regret it. Evening comes, slower than usual. You sit outside the bakery, apron still on, back against the wall, watching the city wind down. Children chase each other with figs. A man tunes a lyre with more confidence than skill. The sun sets behind a tangle of rooftop gardens and fading banners, and across the alley the rival baker nods at you. Just once, you nod back, because you both know what it means to stand in the heat, to fight the flour, to try something new and have it land. Tomorrow the battle begins again, but tonight you made a loaf that spoke and someone heard it. The next morning arrives wrapped in fog. A damp grey curtain drapes across the alleyways, muffling sounds and softening the outlines of the city. For a moment, Rome feels smaller, less empire, more sleepy village. You step outside the bakery, stretch, and breathe in the scent of wet stone and rising dough. Inside, the oven is already murmuring. One of the apprentices, for reasons known only to him, and perhaps Jupiter, is singing softly to the loaves. You pretend not to notice. Today's forecast: moisture, which means trouble for the crust. Damp air makes for soggy results unless you adjust. Hotter bake, shorter proof, maybe an extra handful of barley to tighten the crumb. You do the mental math while kneading. It's all feel now. Your hands know what the dough needs before your brain does. You're turning into your boss and you're not even mad about it. The head baker grunts as he enters, carrying a small bundle. He drops it onto the counter. Inside, a new set of bread stamps, hand-carved, wooden, one with a dolphin, one with a lion, one, inexplicably, shaped like a turnip. "These are from Livia," he mutters, wants her loaves stamped from now on, claims its brand identity. You smirk. Roman patricians and their need to feel unique, even in bread. Here's a fun historical bit. Personalized bread stamps were a real thing, used to mark ownership, show off a bakery's brand, or simply to let the servants know which loaf belonged to whom in large households. Some were beautifully carved, others looked like a distracted goat made them. Yours fall somewhere in between. You assign the stamps to each apprentice. One immediately drops the lion face down in dough and panics. Another gives the dolphin a top hat. You let it slide. Outside, the fog begins to lift, and with it comes a sudden swell of foot traffic. Turns out, on damp mornings, everyone wants hot bread. The queue spills past the alley full of hunched shoulders and fog-dampened cloaks. There's a quiet energy to the crowd, less festive, more survival mode. You can practically hear stomachs growling. You ramp up production. The oven's heat now licks at your cheeks as you reach in and out, spinning trays, flipping loaves, scoring crusts. Your arms ache, but in a good way, the ache of purpose. Someone calls out for yesterday's spicy loaf. You blink. "Spicy?" you ask. "The one with the strange warmth. Not hot, just interesting." "Ah, the Tarsus spice." You nod, grab one of the experimental loaves, wrap it in cloth and hand it over. A coin is dropped into your palm. Then another request, and another. Soon, you're running out of the experimental batch. The apprentices are scrambling to remake the dough, but the jar is almost empty. That tiny jar of unlabeled spice has become popular. Historians still debate the use of spice in Roman baking. While garum and herbs dominated savory dishes, sweeter spices, imported and costly, snuck into breads and cakes more often than records suggest. Some think the lower classes never tasted them. Others argue markets were full of traders selling small pinches, enough to elevate even the humblest dough. Whatever the truth, you now have a signature loaf, and people are noticing. At one point, a woman from the other side of the Tiber arrives, clearly wealthy, clearly uncomfortable, standing in line, and says, "My sister sent me. She said you make bread that remembers the sun." You nearly drop your peel. You hand her 2 loaves, even though you should only give her 1. The head baker notices, says nothing, just watches you. Later, he passes by your station. "You naming it yet?" You blink. "Naming what?" He grunts. "The loaf, the one with the spice. Can't keep calling it the spicy thing." A pause. Then, "Give it a name. You're stuck with it now." You chew on that thought through lunch. You eat a wedge of barley bread with soft cheese and figs, staring at a half-finished dough, round like it's going to whisper its title. You try sunloaf, too floury, heat bread. Sounds like a punishment. Tarsus twist? Maybe it doesn't need a fancy name. Maybe it just needs a symbol. You carve a tiny spiral onto the crust before it goes into the oven. Not deep, just enough. When it comes out, the mark has risen perfectly, baked into the crust like a signature. It's yours now. Later, a child points to it and says, "The bread with the swirl." That settles it. You lie in your flour sack that night. eyes closed, thinking about the day. The damp air, the hungry crowds, the way one jar of spice changed everything, the swirl loaf, your swirl loaf, and as you drift into sleep, you wonder what future bakers will say when they find the stamp in the ruins. Will they taste the spice, the fog, the faint hint of citrus? Will they say, "This loaf remembered something"? Maybe. The next morning feels different, not just because the sunrise is blushing extra gold across the rooftops, not just because the oven's already roaring before your feet hit the floor. No, today feels different because when you step outside to sweep the threshold, something people pretend is about cleanliness but is mostly about pride, there are already 3 people waiting. All of them ask the same thing. "Do you still have the swirl one?" You nod, say, "Give me 20 minutes," and duck back inside before they see you smile like an idiot. Should be tired. You've been working 6 days straight. Your shoulders feel like they've been kneaded by a centurion. There's flour in your ear. You've named your favorite broom, but somehow, this morning, you feel light. The swirl loaf has caught on. You pinch out the last bit of the mystery spice from the Tarsus jar and measure it like it's molten gold. You add a drop of oil to the crust wash this time, just to see if it crisps better. You score your now signature swirl a little deeper, just enough to tempt the fire. While it bakes, you notice the other apprentices' sneaking glances. "You want to learn it?" you ask. They all nod, even the tall one who pretends he doesn't care. You don't write it down, you just talk them through it. Feel, texture, smell. If the dough sticks to your palm but not your knuckles, it's ready. If it smells like sweet earth, you've measured the spice right. If it sighs when you score it, you're done. They listen. One even takes notes on a scrap of wax tablet, etching the spiral symbol in the corner. And just like that, you've passed something on. Not a recipe, not really, but a rhythm. Here's a fringe historical theory you love. Some scholars believe Roman apprentices didn't just inherit trade secrets, they inherited rituals. The exact flick of the wrist when shaping a roll, the whispered phrase before closing the oven door, the order in which you stacked your cooling racks. These weren't practical steps, they were memory, habit, legacy. Your swirl is becoming one. The batch sells out before noon. One of the customers is a soldier on leave. He eats his loaf on the curb and hums between bites. Another, a nervous young man, buys 2 and wraps them carefully in cloth. "For my mother," he says. You give him a 3rd for free. The head baker watches it all, says nothing, but later he walks past your bench, drops a new jar of spice beside your mixing bowl, and keeps walking. No comment, no ceremony, but the jar is full. You crack it open. Same scent, same warmth. You close your eyes and breathe in gratitude. Midday brings another delivery to the Thermopolium, the little street cafe you've come to admire for its astonishing ability to sell burnt stew with confidence. They want a standing order of the swirl loaf now to serve, toasted with olive paste. You pretend to negotiate while secretly thrilled. Back at the bakery, someone brings up the loaf riots. You laugh, but it's not a joke. Quirky tidbit of the day. During the reign of Emperor Claudius, there were actual riots in Rome over bread shortages, not taxes, not war, bread. The grain shipment was late, the ovens went cold, people panicked, statues were pelted with crusts. The emperor had to personally address the mob and promise that the supply would be restored. Fast. Bread doesn't just feed, it unites, it divides. It makes people feel seen or ignored. That evening, a girl shows up at the door with a pouch of coins and a hopeful look. "My father's sick," she says. "He ate your bread yesterday. It was the first thing he smiled at in days." You give her 2 loaves. She tries to pay. You shake your head. She hugs them like gifts, then runs off barefoot into the alley. Later, as the fire dies down and the apprentices stretch out to sleep on sacks and benches and anything vaguely horizontal, you sit at the bench and trace the swirl into the soft flour. Just once. Then wipe it away. Because tomorrow, you'll do it again. and again. And maybe, someday, long after you're gone, someone else will be making a loaf with that same gentle heat, that same swirl, that same quiet intention, and they'll wonder, who started this? They won't know your name, but they'll taste your story. Rain taps gently on the roof tiles above the bakery. Not a storm, just a steady, rhythmic patter, like the city is steeping slowly. The kind of rain that slicks the cobblestones, softens the market dust, and makes everything smell like wet laurel and clay. You open the shutters anyway. Rome glistens. Inside, the heat from the oven fogs the windows. You draw a smiley face in the condensation, a childish act, but it stays, like a secret between you and the steam. This kind of weather is good for soup, and soup demands bread. Thick, crusty, sink to the bottom of the bowl bread. You reach for the barley flour. It's coarse, grounding, feels right. You begin your new batch in quiet. No one's talking this morning. The apprentices move like ghosts, heads low, bodies slow. One has a bandaged finger, another keeps sneezing. You hand him a crust to chew on, partly for sympathy, partly to keep him from contaminating the dough. Then the head baker appears, carrying something in both hands. It's a clay tablet. Old, cracked, still legible. "I found this," he mutters, "behind the flour bin." The text is simple, an ingredient list, a method, a name carved into the corner, Lucia. Someone long ago left this here, maybe by accident, maybe on purpose. The tablet is dated by style and script, at least 50 years old. The apprentices gather around like scholars at a temple. You trace the inscription with a floured finger. The recipe is for a bread, flavoured with sesame, fig, and goat cheese. No mention of oven temp, of course. The ancients assumed you'd know. You decide to try it. The dough is strange, sticky, too wet, you adjust. Add a whisper of spelt to tighten it. The cheese gives it weight, the figs bring sweetness, and the sesame? Toasty magic. You shape the loaves with care, score them not with your swirl, but with a single diagonal slash, Lucia's mark from what you can see. Historians still argue whether these tablets were family recipes, trade secrets, or just scribbled reminders. Some say bakers passed them down like heirlooms. Others believe they were scratched out in flour dust moments of frustration, then forgotten. You believe both. The first loaf bakes beautifully. The crust crisps. The scent is unlike anything else you've baked. Nutty, creamy, sweet. You cut it open. The fig has caramelized into little ribbons. The cheese melted into a swirl. One of the apprentices takes a bite and sits down on the floor like he's been hit. You laugh. You save the first slice for the head baker. He chews, nods, write it down. So you do. On new wax, carefully, deliberately, you write Lucia's bread at the top, and below it you press your own swirl symbol. Not to steal, not to overwrite, but to join. Rain continues to fall. The shop is quiet, save for the creak of the oven door, the soft whisper of flour being sifted, the satisfied hum of someone finishing their second slice. Then a knock at the side entrance. It's the boy from the Ludus, the gladiator school. He's soaked, breathing hard, holding a coin pouch in one hand and a crumpled note in the other. "They want the hard loaves again," he says, "but softer, less like armour." You stifle a laugh. You fetch the new gladiator batch, made with added olive oil and a touch of lentil flour for softness. You hand him the bundle, and before he leaves, you tuck a swirl loaf into the sack. No charge. He grins. "I'll share, maybe." Here's a historical tidbit to chew on. Some Roman bakeries became unofficial suppliers for entire neighbourhoods or institutions, like bathhouses, temples, or yes, gladiator schools. It wasn't just about profit, it was about reliability. If your bread showed up every morning, hot, decent, unburnt, you earned a kind of trust no Senate decree could replace. You turn back to your bench and begin shaping tomorrow's swirl loaves. Your hands move without thinking now. Knead, fold, rest. Each movement smooth, each shape familiar. The swirl carved just so. The rain starts to fade. Light filters through the clouds in slow gold bands. One lands on the Lucia loaf, still warm, still half-eaten. You wrap the rest in cloth and set it on the shelf, not for sale, not for the apprentices, just in case Lucia ever comes back. You wake before the light does. The air is thick and still, the kind of quiet that feels like it's waiting for something to begin. Even the city seems to be holding its breath. You slide off your flour sack bed, stretch, and walk barefoot across the cool tile floor, dodging a ladle someone forgot to hang and a rogue sesame seed that somehow got embedded into your heel. In the corner, the fire from last night has gone out completely. No glow, no smoke, just ash. It shouldn't feel like a crisis. Fires go out all the time. But this is different. Because when you run a Roman bakery, the fire isn't just warmth, it's continuity. Some bakeries kept their ovens burning for weeks, months, even years, without extinguishing them. The fire is what connects one day's loaf to the next. Break that link, and something in the rhythm falters. You stare at the oven, feeling the coldness radiating from its stone belly. Then you light it again. Slowly, gently, a twist of straw, a sliver of dry wood, a blown breath. A spark, it catches. Tiny flames lick the base. You feed them carefully. The warmth spreads, the air begins to shift. And just like that, the thread between yesterday and today is stitched back together. One of the apprentices stumbles in, rubbing his eyes. He stops when he sees the oven. "You relit it already?" he asks. You nod. He grunts in admiration and starts preparing the dough trays. No compliments, just respect. You begin your swirl batch, hands moving automatically now. The spice from the Tarsus jar has nearly run out again. You stretch it, barely a pinch per loaf now, blended with fennel and fig. It's not quite the same, but it echoes the same warmth, close enough to keep the customers smiling, close enough that they'll say, "It tastes like that loaf. You know the one?" A few loaves in, the head baker emerges. He's holding a scroll, not a shopping list. Not an order form, a letter. He hands it to you wordlessly. You open it. The script is tight, slanted, formal. It's from a household in the Aventine district, a wealthy one, a senator's family. The wife, Flavia, had one of your swirl loaves at a recent gathering. She wrote, by hand, to request regular deliveries, not just for herself, for her guests, her clients, her extended network. She wants your bread to become her brand. She's hosting a feast next week, the head baker says. Wants 15 swirl loaves, individually wrapped, with her crest stamped on top. You stare. "Can I use my swirl?" you ask. He shrugs. "Use both. Give hers the top. Keep yours on the bottom. Let the loaves talk to each other." That's more poetic than you expected from a man whose catchphrase is usually, "Check the crust." You get to work. That day, the bakery becomes a studio. Loaves are weighed, shaped, and scored with precision. The swirl on the base, the crest on the crown. Each dough ball gets a linen tie dusted with flour, set aside like a gift. By midday, they fill the long bench like resting cats. You prep a display basket for Flavia's runner to collect. You add a sprig of rosemary to the lining, not for flavor, but for presentation, the kind of little touch people remember without realizing. As the oven cools that evening, the apprentices gather to gawk at the leftovers. "These going to senators now?" one asks. "You going to be famous?" You shrug. "Maybe the bread will be." That night, after everything's been scrubbed and the fire banked low, you pull out the wax tablet where you've been keeping notes. Not the shop's ledger. Your ledger. It's messy, smudged, filled with phrases like, "Maybe fennel, but less weird," and "Fix the olive twist. Looks like a snake." But at the back is a growing list, a quiet little roll call of every person who's come back for your bread. You don't know all their names, but you remember their faces, the way they smiled, the way they cradled the loaves like something worth more than coin. You add one more name tonight, Flavia, and beneath it you draw the swirl. Because if her guests ask, "Where did you get this bread?" she might say her cook made it. She might say nothing at all, but maybe, just maybe, She'll turn the loaf over and see your mark. The next morning starts with chaos, not the usual bustle of flour and fire, but a sharper, louder kind, the kind where the door slams open before the shutters are even unlatched, and someone shouts, "Where is it? Where's the swirl bread?" It's a man in a clean tunic, with the frayed posture of a messenger who's been yelled at too many times. He's panting, holding a velvet pouch and a wax-sealed scroll like they're going to explode. You blink sleep from your eyes and gesture to the rack behind you. Still cooling. He looks like he might cry. "I need 5. Flavia doubled her order. She's furious. Something about ungrateful clients and how dare they ask for other bread now. She says she'll send a musician if it happens again. You don't ask what that means. You just hand him 6 loaves and hope it's enough to protect his sanity. The scroll is a thank you note. Elegant handwriting, smells faintly of rose oil. In the corner, scribbled in haste, "Whatever you put in this bread, don't stop." So, of course, that's the day the Tarsus spice runs out. You upend the jar like it might hide a secret compartment. Nothing. Just a dusting of sweet citrusy aroma, like a ghost of all the loaves that came before. You sit down on the bench, dust on your fingertips, heart doing that quiet panic that bakers know too well. The moment when your signature loaf, your mark, relies on something now gone. The apprentices eye you carefully. One offers a handful of crushed coriander, another a jar of dried mint. Both wrong, both kind. You shake your head. You don't need to replace the spice, you need to honor it. So you build a new version. You start with what you remember, warmth, not heat. A subtle sweetness, earthy but bright. You grind dried orange peel, add a touch of fennel, a hint of honey-soaked anise. You blend it into the dough with care, kneading as if you're whispering to it. The head baker watches, arms crossed. He doesn't interrupt. You bake the first test loaf alone. It's nerve-wracking. The swirl bakes perfectly, but will the flavor carry? You cut it. The crust sings. The crumb is tight, warm, laced with a subtle scent. You taste. It's not the same, but it remembers the same story. You wrap the new loaves in cloth, mark them with the swirl, and stack them on the counter with a quiet sense of defiance. The apprentices try it next. One shrugs. Tastes like yesterday's bread had a dream. You grin. That's good enough. You decide to rename it, not publicly, not yet, but in your own ledger. Swirl 2, a continuation, not a copy. Later that day, a group of young scribes comes in, laughing, each holding coins wrapped in parchment. "We heard there's a loaf that helps with bad poetry." You raise an eyebrow. They grin. "We'll take 4. By mid-afternoon, the bakery is buzzing again, not frantically, not frenzied, just alive. You start seeing familiar faces, the olive merchant's daughter, the boy from the gladiator school, a pair of older women who never buy anything but always ask to smell the bread. One of them leans in close and says, "Your bread makes the world feel slower. Thank you." You nod, unable to say much in return, because honestly, you needed that. Historical side note. While many ancient Roman loaves were functional, feed the workers, calm the crowds, honor the gods, there were also luxury loaves, gifts, tokens, wedding breads shaped like crescents, celebration breads filled with dates and wrapped in fig leaves, not because people needed them, but because they meant something. That's what the swirl loaf has become. You light the evening lamp and find yourself carving a new stamp into a scrap of soft wood. It's the swirl, but now with a line beneath it, a little curve, a second layer, a nod to the next chapter. You press it into one of the cooling loaves, not deep, just enough to leave a memory. That night the rain returns, softer this time. You sit near the oven, its warmth humming into the walls, and you sip a mug of warm must while the apprentices argue about who ruined the olive knot they all did. You take out your ledger and add a new name to the bottom of your customer list, unknown poet, paid in compliments, requested whatever tastes like inspiration. And beneath it, you draw the new swirl. Because sometimes bread isn't just about hunger, it's about remembering something. Something soft and warm and wordless, and baking it into the world so someone else can remember it too. You don't hear the knock this time. You feel it, through the soles of your sandals, a rhythmic tapping that travels through the worn stone and into your bones. You pause mid-knead. The dough slumps on the table like a tired gladiator. Outside, the morning is already rustling to life, but this knock is patient, deliberate, expectant. You open the door. The man standing there is draped in a weather-stained cloak, beard curled by wind, sandals dusty from travel. He doesn't smile, doesn't speak. He just reaches into his satchel and pulls out a loaf. Your loaf. You blink. It's a swirl loaf, all right. Burnt slightly at the edges, underproofed in the middle, but unmistakable. The mark is there, faint but clear. Your swirl, your signature. Except you didn't bake this one. He holds it out. I found this in Antioch, he says. A woman gave it to me. Told me it was from Rome. Told me it was baked with a mark that means the baker cares more about warmth than perfection. You stare. He breaks the loaf in half, hands you the softer piece. You bite into it. It's different and not bad, but missing something. The spice is dull, the crust rushed, but the heart is still there. The memory of your loaf lives in this bread. She said it was made by someone who started with nothing but kept showing up, he continues. He finally looks at you. Are you the one who started the swirl? You nod. He bows slightly, places a pouch of flour at your feet and walks away. You watch him go for a long time. Inside the pouch, fresh spice, new, strange, bright, sharp. It smells like citrus and pepper and something else, something that makes your mouth water and your eyes burn. You clutch the pouch like a secret. Back inside, you begin testing immediately. You blend the new spice into the dough, carefully, reverently. This time you knead slower, you hum to the dough, you speak to it like an old friend. You don't replace the original flavor, you expand it, evolve it. It's not swirl too, it's something else. You score it differently. Two arcs that meet, forming a wave. A motion, a continuation. While it bakes, you begin shaping your other loaves. The barley rolls, the cheese, twists, the crusty panis quadratus for the construction crews near the forum. But your mind is still in the oven where that new swirl is rising. When it's ready, you don't slice it right away, you just hold it. It's lighter than you expected. You finally cut a slice. It's astonishing, warm, complex, sweet, but with an edge. Like the memory of a story you're not sure was ever real. You hand it to the head baker. He chews, he pauses, then he says, "This is dangerous," which from him is basically a standing ovation. You test the loaves on your regulars first. The olive merchant's daughter says it tastes like spring. The gladiator boy says, "If I eat this before a match, I won't even need armor." The two older women nod in unison. One says, "It's the kind of bread you give to someone who's just told you a secret." By mid-afternoon, the new swirl has a name. You don't choose it. A child does. She points at the loaf, cooling on the rack, and says, "That one's the wave bread, or for bread, right? Because it makes you feel like floating." The name sticks. You start a new page in your ledger, Wave Loaf. You draw the double arc. And beneath it, you write one sentence. Started in fire. Carried by memory, changed by journey. Here's your historical oddity. There are fragments of graffiti in Pompeii, scribbled near bakeries, that mention breads not by name, but by feeling. One reads, "The loaf that reminded me of my sister." Another, "The one I gave to a man I didn't marry." Historians debate what these meant. Were they real products, personal metaphors, simple cravings? You think maybe all three. That night, as the oven fades and the bakery sighs into silence, you sit near the ledger and light a small lamp. You take out a new tablet, the clean one, the one you've been saving, and for the first time, you write a full recipe from memory. Not because you need to, but because someone else might. You finish it with your swirl. Then the wave, the side by side, and you sleep soundly that night, knowing the fire may go out again someday. But the bread will continue. You wake to applause. Well, something like applause, more like a flurry of claps, sandals slapping stone, and a child yelling, "They're here! They're here!" outside the bakery door. You roll off your flour sack, squint toward the morning light, and remember, today is Market Exhibition Day. Every few months, Rome hosts a spectacle of sorts, a cross between a civic competition, a street fair, and a very public shouting match. Bakers from all over the city, and some from the hills beyond, drag their carts, their best loaves, and their biggest egos into the open square to compete. Not for money, not officially, but for reputation, for pride, for the right to say, "Yes, I made that." And the crowd roared. You weren't planning to enter. But then there's the wave loaf. The apprentices are already buzzing around, polishing the display cart, dusting off your cleanest apron, arguing over which baskets look the least chewed by rats. The head baker is uncharacteristically silent as he hands you a folded note. From the guild steward, he says, "You're in, whether you meant to be or not." You open it, your name, your bakery, a slot, a space on the judge's table, and scribbled below that, in ink that's tried to be elegant, but mostly looks panicked, "Bring the one with the swirl." You laugh, then panic, then start baking. You prep 3 versions of the wave loaf, slightly different spice blends, slightly different crust finishes. One with a tighter crumb for slicing. One with a richer glaze for scent. One with sesame worked into the dough, just to see if the judges prefer a crunch. The oven burns hotter today, not by design. It just knows. By midday, the loaves are cool enough to carry. You place them in linen-lined baskets, swaddle them like sacred scrolls, and load them into the cart with a nervous apprentice and a flask of watered wine that you fully intend to drink if things go wrong. The market square is chaos, musicians blaring, vendors shouting, bakers shouting louder. The scent of 20 kinds of bread mingles into something dizzying. Crusts shine, crumbs fly. A man in a toga is trying to cut a loaf with a stylus. A woman is arguing with someone over whether honey belongs in rye. You take your place at the table. The judges are a mixed bag, one guild official, one temple priest, one senator's wife, and one very stern-looking man who may be a poet or may just hate bread. It's unclear. You present the loaves. They nod, murmur, slice, taste. Then silence. You watch their faces like a baker watches rising dough. Too much attention, not enough control. The priest nods, tastes like something ancient. The poet, after a long pause, says, "It doesn't try too hard. That's rare." The senator's wife leans in and whispers, "Do you deliver to Aventine?" You exhale, not a cheer, not a trophy, but approval. And more than that, curiosity. The head of the guild finally speaks. "Is this your own recipe?" You nod. Where did it come from? You pause, think, then say, "A forgotten jar, a quiet fire, and the need to make something that feels like it was always supposed to be here." He writes something on a scroll. You don't ask what. Afterward, you wander the square. You buy a slice of barley cake from an old man who's been baking longer than you've been alive. He tries your swirl loaf and chuckles. "Not bad," he says. "Bit new, bit old. That's a hard line to walk." You nod. "I trip over it sometimes," he shrugs. "Still, you're walking it." Later that night, back in the bakery, the apprentices want a full report. You give them highlights. The applause, the senator's wife, the crust that cracked just right. You don't mention how your hands trembled when you handed over the loaf. That part's just for you. Here's your curious tidbit for the day. In ancient Roman culture, the term fama didn't just mean fame. It meant reputation as spoken by others, whispered, retold, reshaped. Bread had fama. Bakers, too. You could be known not by name, but by scent, by crust, by symbol. You close up shop, tuck the unsold wave loaf into a cloth, and leave it on the temple steps down the road, not for the gods, but for whoever needs it most. And as you walk back, the stars just beginning to freckle the sky, you think, this is how bread becomes legend. One bite at a time. The temple loaf is gone by morning. You expected it, maybe even hoped for it. Still, there's something quietly thrilling about seeing the empty cloth folded neatly on the steps. No crumbs, no coins. Just absence, like a soft thank you left without words. Back at the bakery, things are oddly still. No customers yet. No clattering tools. Even the oven seems to be in a contemplative mood, its fire flickering gently, like it too needs a slower start. You take the quiet as a sign and reach for the ledger. Today you're going to write down the swirl, not the crust score, not the spice ratio, not the bake time. The swirl itself. What it means. Why you made it. How you knew when it was ready. You write. A spiral is not a circle. It moves, it builds, it returns, but higher. You draw the mark again, carefully. This time you shade it lightly, then underline it with a phrase. Warmth made visible. An apprentice appears behind you holding a cracked mixing bowl and a question on his face. Can I try one? He asks. You blink. Try a swirl? He nods. You hand him the new spice pouch. You watch his hands tremble slightly as he measures it out, not perfectly, but with care. That's all that matters. He kneads too roughly, scores too deep. But when the loaf bakes, it blooms lopsided and charming. He beams. Is it okay? You nod. It's better than okay. It's yours. And now it begins again. Later that day, a woman arrives with a request you haven't heard before. I'm getting married, she says. Next week. I want to serve swirl bread at the feast, not because it's fashionable, because it tastes like belonging. You feel your throat tighten just slightly. You agree, of course. You promise to make 10 loaves, one with a special mark for the couple to slice together. You don't say anything cheesy, you just nod. She leaves a list of guests and a handful of dried lavender for scenting the baskets. You don't know if it'll work. You'll try anyway. Here's your historical sidebar. Bread played a major role in Roman weddings, not just as food, but as symbol. The panis phareus, a sacred spelt loaf, was used in ceremonies to bind the couple. Sometimes they broke it together, sometimes the bride simply offered a slice as a sign of unity. You wonder what people will say about the swirl loaf in 50 years. Ah yes, the bread they served when people needed to remember something. The next few days blur. You bake the wedding batch. You add lavender to the baskets. You include a small jar of honey and a note for a sweet crust and a soft start. The bride picks them up herself. Her eyes shine when she sees the loaves. You didn't have to go this far, she says. You reply, bread should always go farther than expected. The ceremony is that evening. You're not invited, but that's fine. Your bread is. That's enough. That night, you find another loaf on the temple steps, one of yours, wrapped carefully, marked with the swirl. A bite missing, a fig tucked into the cloth, and a note. It helped, thank you. No signature. You sit for a while in the alley with that loaf beside you. The city hums around you, soft now, a lullaby of carts and wind and distant song. You break off a piece, eat it slowly, and smile, because the bread came back, because the swirl was passed on, because somewhere in this sprawling, stone-skinned city, someone thought of you when they needed comfort. And that's the real recipe. Not the spice, not the flour, not the fire, but the knowing that what you make stays. It begins with smoke, not the usual kind, the warm, nutty haze of the oven, the sweet, curling scent of sesame crusts. This is acrid, sharp, alarming. You rush outside and look down the alley, heart already thudding. It's not your bakery, but it's close. The shop, 2 streets over, the one run by old Aurelius, the baker with the crooked hands and perfect spelt loaves, is on fire. By the time you get there, it's mostly smoke. The worst of it's over. The neighbours doused the roof with wet cloaks and buckets. The oven is cracked, the shelves blackened. The fire, they say, started from a dropped lamp. Late baking, exhaustion, the usual culprit. You find Aurelius sitting on the ground outside, covered in soot, holding the handle of his ruined peel. He's not crying, just staring at the empty space where his window used to be. You don't ask what he needs. You just say, "We've got space in our oven." He looks up, eyes full of disbelief. "You'll share your hair, your heat?" You nod. He nods back. The kind of nod that says more than any speech could. So that night, the oven runs longer. You shift your batches, rearrange the prep. Hand one apprentice to Aurelius, keep another on the swirl loaves. The head baker mutters, this isn't a hostel, but he shovels coals anyway. You share fire, share tools, share silence, and by morning, the first of Aurelius's loaves emerge from your oven. Spelt, as always, dense, crackling, beautiful. You make space on your shelf. You place a small tag on his loaves, Aurelius, nothing fancy. Just his name, carved into soft clay, set beside your own swirl-marked basket. Customers notice. Some ask questions, most don't. They just buy. And so the fire becomes a bridge, not an end. That afternoon, Aurelius hands you something. A wooden box. Inside, a stamp, not his usual simple line, but an older one. A sigil shaped like a sheaf of grain cradled by hands. "My mother's," he says. "She used it before I did." "I haven't touched it in years." You run your finger across the carved grooves. He shrugs. "Thought you might know what to do with it." You carve it onto a barley loaf. One of his, one of yours, a collaboration that no one planned, but everyone will taste. Here's your historical curiosity. Some bakeries kept stamps that were only used for occasions, births, deaths, weddings, new beginnings, not for selling, for remembering. Loaves as ceremony, as markers of time. You decide to use the sheaf stamp only when someone needs a restart. Later that week, a woman arrives, pale, tired, holding the hand of a child who won't meet your eyes. They don't ask for anything specific, just something warm. You wrap a spelt loaf, press the sheaf stamp into it. You don't charge. They don't thank you. They just walk away slowly. The head baker watches and mutters, "You'll bake us into poverty?" You smile, maybe, but at least it'll taste good. You add the sheaf stamp to your ledger. You mark it. For rebuilding, for after the smoke. That night, Aurelius stays late. He tells stories you've never heard, of the first loaf he ever made, of how his father's bakery didn't survive a flood, but the starter lived. "We kept it alive in a pot," he says, "carried it across the city, started again." You ask if he still has it. He nods. And the next morning, he brings a jar. You feed it with fresh flour. Stir it gently. Smell the sharp, sweet tang of age and resilience. You bake with it. The loaf is dense, strong, tastes like old stone and stubborn roots. You call it resurgo, Latin for "I rise again." Customers love it, not because it's soft, not because it's sweet, but because it means something. And by the end of the week, your shelves have three symbols: the swirl, the wave, the sheaf. Bread for warmth, bread for memory, bread for rebuilding. And somewhere between them all, you find yourself becoming more than a baker. You're a keeper of stories. And every loaf, a message someone didn't know they needed until they tasted it. Rain again, but this time it's not gentle. It lashes the roof like a personal vendetta, rattles shutters, floods alleys, soaks firewood. The bakery leaks in two places, both of which you've already tried to patch with wax, cloth, and low-grade optimism. The oven holds its heat, thankfully. The stone sweats, the flames flicker like they're offended by the humidity, but they endure, like you do. Aurelius is still working from your bench. His own bakery's roof is being relaid with fresh tiles, but he insists on bringing his own tools, his own sack of grain, and his own way of muttering disapproval at anything remotely modern. He's grown fond of the swirl loaf, doesn't admit it. But yesterday he packed two for a friend. You didn't ask. Today you try something different. a swirl loaf infused with rosemary and sea salt, topped with a dusting of cracked coriander. You call it the coastal swirl just to amuse yourself. The apprentices are skeptical. The head baker sniffs it like it might bite him. The first customer takes one bite, closes her eyes, and says, "That tastes like walking along the port at sunset." Success. It goes into the ledger under Swirl Variant 3, Coastal. And just as you're noting that down, someone barges through the door in soaked sandals and yells, "You're in the Herald." The Roman Herald isn't a joke. It's not just gossip and gladiator match results. It's where reputations get pinned like medals or peeled off like bad crusts. You run to the back table where someone's left a copy half crumpled under a sack of millet. There it is. A column titled 3 Loaves That Tell a Story. And right in the middle, there's a baker near the Aventine whose bread doesn't shout. It listens. The swirl loaf is quiet comfort. The wave loaf is memory in motion. And the sheaf, it's hope you can hold in both hands. You don't breathe for a moment. Then you sit down, flour-streaked, rain-damp, heart thudding like a butter churn. The apprentices read over your shoulder. "Wait," one says. "Are we famous?" You laugh. "No, the bread is." They cheer anyway. Here's a fringe detail from history. Roman bakers rarely became famous by name. Their work lived through symbols, stamps, and reputation. Their loaves were their voice, their proof of life. Occasionally, an especially beloved baker was mentioned in a will, or, once, in a poem. You wonder idly if someday someone will write a verse about your swirl. Business doubles that week. People come from other districts, other cities. One woman from Gaul, passing through on her way to Ostia, asks for 6 loaves to take back home. "I'll ration them," she says, "like treasure." You wrap each loaf in linen and press your swirl deep into the crust. You also give her a starter, dried, packed in wax paper, sealed with the smallest clay swirl you've ever made. "Feed it," you tell her, "every 3 days, and listen to what it tells you." She nods like you've handed her a secret, not just yeast. You add her to your ledger, Camilla from Gaul. Took bread and something more. One night Aurelius tells you he's going back to his shop next week. Roof is fixed. Oven stable. "I'll miss this place," he says, brushing flour off his hands. You nod. "You'll visit?" you ask. He shrugs. "If the loaves miss me." He leaves behind a few tools. "Borrowed," he says, "until you forget they were ever mine." You won't. You place one, his old scoring knife, in a drawer labelled Memory Implements. You stare at your shelf, the swirl, the wave, the sheaf, the new rosemary variant. And something stirs in you, something beyond baking, a tug toward teaching. Because what's the point of making all this if it dies with your hands? You begin writing a scroll, a simple one. Title: How to Bake a Story. It starts like this. Begin with warmth. Add truth. Knead until your hands know more than your head. And never fear if it burns. Some stories begin at the edge of flame. You'll finish it later. The oven needs you now. And someone at the door is asking softly if there's any bread left that remembers what it's like to be forgiven. You give them a sheaf loaf, still warm, always warm. The first snow doesn't fall so much as arrive, soft, sudden, and utterly unapologetic. You wake to find the bakery's doorway framed in pale white, rooftops slouched under frosting, the alley unusually silent. Even the pigeons look surprised. One sits on your shutter, blinking slowly, like it can't believe it's cold again. Inside, the oven is already lit. Someone, probably the young apprentice, rose before you and fed the fire. The room hums with that deep, clean warmth only early winter brings. Your hands itch to bake. You know what the city wants today. Winter bread. Dense. Dark. Sweet. A kind of edible blanket. You reach for the dried fruit jar, the jar of cracked walnuts, the darker flour sack tucked away for these months. You mix slowly, methodically. You hum. The swirl loaf will rest today. This is a different rhythm, the deep season rhythm. Today, you're making panis nivalis, your name for it. Snow bread, molasses, thick dough, dried figs, a touch of pine honey, crushed walnuts, a faint swirl of cinnamon if you can sneak it from the temple, spice trade. It bakes slowly. The crust comes out like tree bark. The inside, rich, soft, sweet, comfort in loaf form. You slice one open, and the smell alone is enough to make an apprentice sigh. You wrap each loaf in heavy cloth and mark it with a new sigil, a snowflake made of 5 short lines, and a dot in the centre, a new symbol. Your fourth. In the ledger, the snow mark. Bread for cold days and colder hearts. You sell out before noon. People come with cloaks pulled tight, eyes red from wind, and ask, is it true you make bread that can warm your memory? You hand them snow loaves and say, only if you let it. One woman stays behind after buying hers. She stands at the counter for a moment, loaf clutched tight, then says, I brought my mother's ring. I don't know why. I just thought maybe I should put it in something warm. You don't ask questions. You bake a special loaf for her. Shape the dough around a clay capsule. Place the ring inside. Seal it gently. When it's done, you hand it over and simply say, break it when you're ready. She nods. Walks away like she's carrying something sacred. Maybe she is. That evening, the apprentices are unusually quiet. One stares at the snowfall through the high window, holding a swirl loaf like a shield. I used to hate winter, he says. Now, it smells like honey crust. You make mulled must for everyone, overspiced, too sweet. They drink it anyway. You sit beside the oven with the head baker, both of you wrapped in flour-dusted cloaks. The flames reflect in his eyes. You've got 4 marks now, he says. Swirl, wave, sheaf, snow. You nod. What next? Next, he asks. You think, then say, oh, I want one for endings. He snorts. Bread for endings? Or for letting go, you reply. He doesn't laugh. Instead, he says, you'll know when it's ready. And with that, he stands, walks slowly to the rack, picks up a snow loaf, cuts it in half, eats in silence, then says, tastes like quiet forgiveness. That night, you press the new mark, the snowflake, into a clay stamp. Fire it in the coals, cool it, stare at it. You think about all the people you've baked for, the ones who smiled, the ones who cried, the ones who never came back but left something behind, a note, a coin, a folded linen scrap. You take out your ledger, write, new sigil, snow mark, not just for cold, for remembrance, for the hush between endings and beginnings, and beneath it, bake when the world forgets how to be soft. You sleep near the oven, warm in a room that smells like pine and sugar and ash. Outside, the snow continues to fall, and inside, the stories stay warm. The city glows under snowlight. Not torchlight, not sunlight, snowlight. That soft, silvery gleam that bounces off white rooftops and makes even the oldest stone buildings seem like they're holding their breath. The bakery, too, seems quieter, wrapped in stillness, listening. You rise early. Not from duty, but restlessness. The fire still burns low and steady. You feed it gently. Stir the coals like you're coaxing an old friend awake. The oven responds with a low, satisfying hum. You kneel before your flour shelf, thinking, not of ingredients, but of marks. You now have 4. The swirl for warmth and comfort. The wave for change and memory. The sheaf for recovery. The snow mark for quiet healing. But something's missing. You've felt it for weeks. You don't have a bread for farewell. You don't even know what it would taste like. Bittersweet? Soft? Dry? Something that lingers after the last bite? The day passes in fragments. A child asks for a swirl loaf and then hugs you for no reason. A messenger brings a note. Flavia's household wants 12 snow loaves for their winter solstice vigil. An old soldier buys a sheaf loaf and tells you it's for a friend I'll never see again. You nod. You give him a fig twist too. The apprentices are prepping celebration breads, circular wreaths dusted with almond flour and pine sugar. But your hands drift towards something simpler, a single round, no spice, just barley, salt, and a bit of honey. You shape it with care, no score, no swirl, just one long line across the top, a horizon. You bake it slowly. When it comes out, it's unassuming, pale, firm, slightly cracked on one side like it tried to split itself open mid-rise. You taste it, it's plain. Then after, a hint of warmth, just a whisper. Exactly what you hoped. You wrap it in linen, place it near the window. You don't name it yet. You just let it be. That evening a woman arrives. She's holding a small jar. She speaks softly. "My father passed this week. He always bought your swirl bread, said it tasted like coming home." She holds out the jar. "It's his sourdough starter. I don't bake, but I think it wants to stay warm." You take the jar. It's light. The dough inside is asleep, but not dead. You set it near the oven, feed it gently, whisper to it as you stir. You say, "He's home again." Later that night you write in your ledger, "New loaf, no mark, no name yet. Barley, salt, honey. Baked for farewells, quiet exits, unspoken thank yous. A soft crumb that doesn't ask to be remembered but is." You leave the last line blank, because some breads don't need names, only purpose. You return to the oven one last time, check the coals, brush the ash. And before the lamp goes out, you place one of the new loaves beside the window again, this time with a folded note. "For anyone leaving, take this. And remember, the door is never fully closed." You sleep that night facing the rack, not to guard the bread, but to be close to it, because goodbyes deserve to be held, even in silence. 2 days later, the nameless loaf is gone. You hadn't sold it, hadn't wrapped it, hadn't even moved it from the window ledge. But someone had come quietly, gently, and taken it. They left a coin, a silver denarius, but not just any coin. One side bears the head of a forgotten emperor. The other, a swirl scratched in by hand, crude, wobbly, but unmistakable. You stare at it for a long time. The apprentices think it's just a prank, a thank you, a coincidence. You don't. You slip the coin into your pocket, then into your palm, then finally into the ledger, taped carefully between the pages beneath a new entry, the horizon loaf, for farewells, soft endings, and whatever comes next. Mark a single straight line, symbol, none yet, meaning unfolding. That morning, the city feels different. Colder, yes, but also slower, as if people are remembering how to walk without rushing. A woman stops outside your door and just inhales. She doesn't buy anything, doesn't speak, just smiles once and walks on. The loaves sell quickly, too quickly. You didn't make enough. The wave loaves go first. Then the swirl. Then a man from the southern roads asks if you still make the one with rosemary and sea salt. You do. Barely. By midday, you're running low on everything, so you make a choice. You open your backup flour, the fine ground sack you've been saving, the flour reserved for emergencies. You hadn't even told the apprentices it existed. You pour it into the bowl like a blessing. You bake without rush, without notes, without a plan. You make 3 loaves, 1 swirl, 1 horizon, 1 new one, almond, honey, sea salt, pressed with a rose-shaped cut. You have no idea what it is yet. You just know it needed to be born. As they bake, a merchant arrives. She says she's opening a new shop. Candles and oils and things that make rooms feel like dreams. She wants to sell bread. Not just any bread, she clarifies. Yours, the ones that feel like they were made for a reason. You laugh softly. How would that even work? She shrugs. People take bread home. Maybe they take meaning with it. She's not wrong. You promise her 3 batches a week. Swirl and snow, maybe wave loaves on Fridays. She asks if you can stamp the bags with something meaningful. You hand her a clay tablet with the swirl. Use this. She holds it carefully. What does it mean? You reply, it means, start here. She nods like she's just read a poem. That night, a boy arrives with no shoes. He's not asking for anything. Just loitering near the door, pretending to be invisible. You bring him the almond honey loaf, the new one. The unnamed one. He clutches it like it's alive. He doesn't speak. He just walks away slowly, disappearing into the city fog. You add a new line in the ledger: rose loaf, sweet, slightly floral, soft, not fragile. For those starting over with no name, you sketch the rose cup beside the words, "You don't know if you'll ever see him again." But the bread will, and that's enough. Historical aside, some Roman tombs were shaped like loaves, carved with names, blessings, messages, because bread wasn't just life, it was afterlife, a way of saying, "I was here, I mattered." You place your hand on the ledger that night and whisper, "So did you." Then slowly you close it, not with finality, with tenderness, like the last word of a lullaby. The wind changes. It whistles in from the north, colder, sharper, bringing with it the scent of frozen pine and distant wood smoke. The kind of wind that tugs at shutters and makes even the bravest centurion think twice before leaving his bedroll. You brace the door with a crate. Inside, the bakery becomes a small world unto itself. A warm island in a sea of cold marble and chilled breath. The apprentices work quietly today. The head baker hums, not a tune, but something rhythmic and low, like a memory he forgot he remembered. You hum along. Today, people come not for bread, but for comfort. A scholar asks for a swirl loaf, then sits in the corner and reads until the lamp gutters. A mother buys 2 snow loaves, then lingers near the oven like she's trying to thaw something deeper than her fingers. A man with tear-reddened eyes requests anything soft. You hand him a sheaf loaf without a word. He bites it outside, in the snow, with the posture of someone trying to stay upright. You wonder, sometimes, if the bread knows who it's feeding. You wonder if the oven has a soul. Midday, the door creaks open again. An elderly man walks in, wearing temple robes and a look of quiet intention. He doesn't glance at the racks, doesn't speak to the apprentices. He walks directly to you. Are you the one who made the bread for Marcus? You blink. Which Marcus? He smiles. The one who never said goodbye properly? You gave him a loaf with a ring inside. Ah, you nod. He steps closer. I'm his brother. He died 3 days ago. A pause. I just wanted to say thank you for helping him say what he couldn't. You hand him a horizon loaf. He accepts it like a scroll. Then leaves, just like that. Here's a strange fact. Roman law once mandated that every bakery must provide at least 1 loaf per day to the poor. Most complied. A few resisted. But many went far beyond. Bread became part of a silent welfare system, a kindness without paperwork, a warmth without praise. You think about that as you knead. You think about it as you shape a swirl, a snowmark, a rose. And as the dough softens under your palms, a phrase rises in your head. For what is bread if not the shape of kindness? You write it in the ledger. Right under the heading, Winter Notes. Later that night, you light a small lamp. Sit at your workbench and pull out the coin, the swirl-scratched denarius. You press it into soft clay. You fire the clay. You set it. You set it aside to cool. Then you take a new loaf, a blend of spelt and rye, a swirl of olive and fig. You press the fired swirl coin gently into its center, imprinting not just the symbol, but the weight of its story. A new stamp, a new signature. This one, for legacy. That evening, a storm rolls in. You watch it from the doorway. The snow no longer surprises you, it welcomes. And beside the oven, your starter bubbles softly, fed, alive, waiting, because even when the world is white and silent, the bread still rises, the storm lingers, days pass in a blur of muffled footsteps and snowdrifts piling like forgotten laundry. The city doesn't stop, it just slows, wraps itself in cloaks and excuses, and breathes through steam and silence. You stay open. You always stay open. The bakery becomes more than a place to buy bread. It's a shelter, a warm hush, a place to dry your cloak, warm your hands, say something you were afraid to say anywhere else. You brew pots of barley tea with dried fig peel. Hand it out in chipped cups. Offer it free, because warmth should never require coin. One evening, a traveller arrives, a woman, heavy boots, a long cloak with a foreign clasp shaped like a fishhook. Her voice is low, her Latin tinted with the coast. She asks, "Do you sell memory?" You pause. "Only in slices, you say?" She smiles. "Then I'll take 3. You wrap 3 different lobes, wave, swirl, sheaf, and hand her a 4th, the new rose one, on impulse. "For beginnings," you tell her. She touches your hand before she leaves. Not long, not awkward. Just enough to say, "You understood me without asking." In the ledger you write, "Fish clasp woman, took 4, left a silence that still feels full." The next morning, something peculiar. A folded cloth outside your door. Inside, a small wooden mould carved with a pattern you've never seen. It looks like wind. You test it in soft dough. The market leaves is graceful. Arcing lines, a faint spiral, like the path smoke takes when no one's watching. You bake with it. The result: a crust that crackles like dried leaves, a crumb that dissolves like dusk on the tongue. You don't name it yet. You just serve it to a boy who stutters and won't meet your eyes. He takes one bite, looks up, and says, clear as spring water, "This feels like not being afraid." You step back, let that settle. Add a note to the ledger. Wind loaf for speaking. For the moment when silence ends, the symbol, 3 curved lines, the meaning up to the eater. Here's a detail most scrolls leave out. Some Roman bakers made loaves as messages, not just flavour, emotion. They wrapped them in cloth colours to suggest intent. Blue for grief, red for celebration, white for transitions. You wonder if modern tongues could be taught that dialect again. Could you say, "I forgive you" with crust? Could you whisper, "I miss you" in crumb? That evening, a man enters with his daughter. She's maybe 5, clutching a rock and a ribbon and a look of sheer determination. "She wants to give you something," he says. The girl reaches out. A small drawing of a loaf with a big swirl and stars all around it. "I like your bread," she says. "It smells like happy dreams." You don't cry, but your throat does that thing. You pin the drawing above the flour sacks, label it, proof. That night the snow slows. The city begins to creak back to life. You hear a flute down the alley, a market crier rehearsing news. A donkey braying like it just remembered it's dramatic. And inside the bakery, the fire hums. You sit with the ledger open, a fresh page in front of you. You write what we've learned so far. People hunger for more than food. The right crust can soften a hard memory. Silence, when warm, is its own kind of hospitality. Loaves can speak, but only if you listen. You don't finish the list. You close the book softly, place a swirl loaf on the steps for morning, and whisper into the embers, "Someone will need you tomorrow. Be ready." The festival approaches. You can feel it in the rhythm of the street, the way footsteps quicken, voices rise, coins jingle more freely. The Saturnalia banners are being hoisted. Laurel wreaths hang crookedly from doors. The scent of roasted chestnuts and spiced wine drifts through every alley like an invitation. But in your bakery, things feel different. Quieter, not somber, not sad, just full. Like everything is brimming just beneath the surface, a rising. The apprentices hum old songs as they knead. The head baker dusts the shelves more carefully than usual. Even the fire crackles with an extra note of mischief. It's the season for generosity. You begin baking gift loaves, smaller, rounder, gently sweet, with ribbons of honey and slivered almonds. You wrap each in linen dyed with beetroot and press a stamp of satin sickle into the crust. People love them. But the best gift loaf is the one you don't sell. You leave it on a doorstep. No note, no mark, just warmth. You do it again the next day and the next. A ritual of anonymous kindness. Each morning someone leaves something at your own step in return. A poem carved into olive bark. A handful of dates wrapped in silk. A simple stone etched with the word stay. You don't know who's doing it. You don't want to. That mystery tastes better than any loaf. And now, something curious is happening. People aren't just buying bread. They're requesting meanings. Do you have something for new fathers? Is there a bread for forgetting an argument? Can I order 2 loaves that say thank you for holding my hand when I was scared? You could say no. You say yes. You reach for the swirl, or the snow mark, or the wind. And sometimes you invent a new one on the spot. A fig and pepper loaf for courage, a crustless barley cake for grief, a twisted lemon rosemary loaf shaped like a question mark for change. You begin keeping a second ledger, not for recipes, for intentions. Bread becomes prayer. One morning you walk past the temple and see something scrawled on the outer wall in charcoal, a crude drawing of your swirl. Beneath it, I ate the story and remembered my own. You sit down right there on the steps and let the moment rise. Historical note, Roman bread was sometimes used as an offering, not just to gods, but to absent friends. They'd place a loaf in a sacred place or send it to someone far away, believing it would carry emotion better than words. You think about sending a loaf to someone you once hurt. You think about sending one to someone who hurt you. You don't, not yet, but you bake them anyway, just in case. That evening, your starter bubbles louder than usual, alive, impatient, ready. You whisper to it, I know, we've got more to do. And as the fire dims, as the bakery rests, as the city leans into joy and wine and noisy love, you sit in the quiet and not lonely, just witnessing. Because sometimes the baker doesn't need to say anything. Sometimes it's enough just to keep the oven warm and trust that the right hands will come to it. Morning arrives like a whisper. The snow has stopped. The city, blanketed in white, wears its silence like a cloak. Even the usual clatter of carts is hushed. A soft breath of wind moves through the bakery's open window. It smells like clean stone and the faint sweetness of wood smoke. Today is the last day of the year, and something inside you stirs with quiet certainty. You don't say it aloud, but you feel it. Today is for finishing. You rise before anyone else. You light the oven yourself. Feed the fire like it's an old friend who's been with you through battles, heartbreak, memory, and mirth. Which, of course, it has. You roll up your sleeves and begin the final bake. One swirl, one wave, one sheaf, one snow mark, one wind, one rose, one horizon, one fig pepper courage loaf, one lemon change braid. You shape them slowly, with intention. As you knead the apprentices wake, they move more quietly than usual, sensing something sacred in the air. One of them lights candles and places them near the ledger. Another sweeps without being asked. The head baker brews barley tea and sets out chipped mugs without speaking. Everyone knows, no music plays, just the sound of hands in dough, fire in stone, breath in lungs. By midday, your final rack is full, the best you've ever made. You wrap each loaf in linen, place a small card in each bundle. You write, this bread was baked with a story inside it. If you listen closely, it will remind you of something you forgot, you loved. You open the door, people come, but this time they don't ask for types. They ask for what they feel. I think I need something brave. Do you have a loaf for letting go? I just want to feel warm. You hand out the right ones, not because you label them, but because you know. One man takes a swirl and bursts into tears before even leaving the room. A young woman hugs the horizon loaf to her chest like it's a letter from someone she misses. A child clutches a snow mark and says, this smells like my grandmother. And you, let's keep wrapping. One by one, The loaves vanish. By dusk, the shelves are bare. You stand in the center of the bakery, apron streaked with flour and ash and honey. The fire burns low, the windows glow with candlelight. And you finally sit, ledger open, quill in hand. You write, final entry. Bread is never just food, it is memory, mercy, mischief, and magic. It is what we offer when we don't know what else to say. And it always, always rises. Even when we don't, you look up. The apprentices are gathered around you, silent, waiting. You smile and say, let's bake again tomorrow. They nod, and for a moment, no one moves, because sometimes the end is just a turning. Sometimes the final loaf is not farewell, but invitation. And in that quiet, candlelit, candlelit space where warmth lingers longer than sound, the story rests. Just for a while, you're still here. And that's the most important part. You've wandered through flower-dusted streets and ember-lit alleys, through snowstorms and festivals and tearful silences, all from the warmth of your bed. You've watched loaves rise like tiny acts of courage, seen strangers find comfort in crusts, and perhaps, just maybe, you remembered something you'd forgotten. That even the quietest hands can shape something that lasts. Take a deep breath now. In, out. Let the heat of the oven fade into a soft glow behind your eyes. Let the scent of honey and barley, rosemary and ash drift into memory. There's no rush, no more customers at the door, no fires to stoke. Only stillness, only the hum of a city wrapped in sleep. Only you floating gently in a place where bread and memory meet, where every loaf is a lullaby and every bite says, you are safe now. Let that feeling settle over you like a warm linen cloth. Let it soften your thoughts, your breath, your bones. You don't need to remember everything. The story remembers you. And tomorrow? Well, the oven will be warm again. The flour will wait patiently. And you'll rise too. But for now, rest. Sleep well, baker of stories. Sweet dreams.